Good morning. How's everybody? David, why are you shaking your head?
Doc, I'm a little tired, but I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna get through. Long week.
Long week. A lot of long weeks, unfortunately. It's tough times, tough times. Yeah, this is I was reading some this morning and as a follow-up to our case study last time about ethical leadership, the Great Resignation. I was doing some reading this morning. I pulled a couple things. Department of Labor statistics. Now, I don't mean this pejoratively, but you folks, more advanced workers are the ones that are leaving, because in many cases, the workloads have increased because we are having such a turnover with younger workers. And that's throwing the burden on the more advanced and older workers. I don't mean old, I mean more, I should say more experienced workers. And that's where the real mental health and physical health is being shown right now. Is young people are just quitting and leaving, but the older people, more experienced people, the people in leadership roles, they have to stay. And the real physical, emotional pressure right now in employment is on leadership. And so the importance of mental health and physical health, well-being as it's now referred to, that's kind of lumped into the mental and physical is lumped into the notion of well-being. This is a critical time, and more so than in the history of this country right now for folks like you, that it's taking such a toll on your well-being, having to be the person who is the rock and show up and do the extra and cover and fill in, and keep hope alive in your organizations. It's a very tough time for leaders right now, and experienced people. Good morning and welcome. And that's exactly what I was looking at. And a couple of those things, if you're not familiar, let me close this. Let me go to this one over here. We'll get to class here in a minute, but this is a follow-up to our last case study. And one of the things, let's see, the Great Resignation is happening, or the big quit, people voluntarily leaving their jobs. Here are some of the numbers. It's you know, the numbers are astounding. How many people are quitting, leaving their jobs, throwing organizations into tailspins. And you can read any number of articles about it, but the one that caught my eye this morning is ethical leadership. Back to our last case study. These are the things that we've got to do to keep people from leaving us. Most time people don't leave a job, they leave a bad leader. It's not about money and working conditions. Sometimes it's about how the leader interacts with them. And here are the 6 main elements of ethical leadership: honesty, justice, respect, integrity, responsibility, and transparency. What are the traits of an ethical? They know the internal compass and values. They have consistent ethical behavior. They do not tolerate deviations from the ethical code. They act with fairness. And I won't belabor this morning, but a couple of takeaways from our last case study. You as senior leadership in your organization or organizations in general cannot tolerate unethical leadership. Just can't. It drives too many people out. People will quit now. They won't just suffer in silence or complain. They just won't show up. Yeah, I'll send this document, David. That's why I saved it. Folks are not suffering in silence now. They're just leaving us. And they leave bad leaders, unethical leaders, people who, don't inform them, don't keep them in the loop, create their own little teams inside of organizations. That's the big right now is we get our group, our squad, whatever we want to call it, and to the exclusion of everybody else. We can't allow that at any level of the organization. And the other takeaway from our last case study is this notion that we have to battle in action research all the time in real life, is the notion that qualitative data, which we're going to get to maybe today from Merriam, that qualitative is not really data. That if it's not a number, that's just somebody's opinion. Well, that's data. I was having a conversation with my wife last night. She records and watches these docudrama shows on people getting caught abroad smuggling drugs. There's 2 or 3 of them on, and she watches those. And the one last night were in Peru. You get caught, you're smuggling drugs, you're desperate, and they lock you up. And one of the, they have it's a docudrama, and so the narrator keeps talking about, well, this person was acting nervous. This person was acting strange. This person was shown. What do we know from Malcolm Gladwell, the foremost qualitative researcher in the world? You can't tell because somebody's acting nervous. I mean, I'd act nervous if you're going to search my luggage, even if I didn't have anything. And what they were showing is some of the groups that this man and woman, they were carrying, $1 million worth of cocaine. They were cool as cucumbers. For some reason, we have this notion that qualitative ought to be as clear as quantitative, and that it ought to be as conclusive, dead bang. And we know it's not. It's a preponderance of evidence. It is opinion. That's the whole notion of qualitative. That doesn't mean it's not true just because it's somebody's opinion. If we get enough people telling us the same thing, we better listen. We better listen. So the whole, to summarize our last case study, the quantitative piece, the survey was manipulated to make things not look too bad. If we looked at it in terms of average, mean average, rather than mode, we disguised it ourselves. We fooled ourselves with our data, and then we discounted what half of the group told us because it's just their opinion. But as we're finding out in the real world right now, if you're not listening to employees, if you're not treating them in an ethical manner, what they consider to be fairness. Now, I'm not big on the notion of fairness. In my opinion, fair is where you go in the fall of the year to get a corn dog and ride the Ferris wheel. And there is no fair. That's an early adolescent concept. If you've ever been around middle school kids, that they're just overpowered with the notion that everything's got to be fair. Well, I have a problem. You've got to move past that, but you've got to treat people equitably. You've got to treat people with integrity and honesty and with ethical behavior. And if you don't, more so than any time in the world of organizations, people will just leave now. And you folks are the prime example of what happens when folks leave. You get shorthanded. Last Sunday night, one of the ladies that works with me called. She teaches for me in my program. She's the principal at Parsley, which now I think, Masonboro Elementary. The name was changed. She's principal at Masonboro Elementary in Wilmington. And she said, I don't know what we're gonna do tomorrow. I said, I've got I've got teachers out, can't get them, can't hire them, got vacancies. I've had 6 to quit. And it was late last Sunday night. She got in touch with me, said, I'm sorry, but I'm she was trying to figure out. I mean, she's been burning the midnight oil, and everybody she's got, not taking their planning periods, covering classes. I mean, it's thrown the people who have stayed the leadership into such a bind, and the pressure of the well-being on folks. One of your colleagues, Kim Roberts, and saying a special prayer. Kim is one that lost her husband last summer before last. We were having Zoom at night, and he got ill and ended up. He's only 47 as a result of COVID. But Kim is doing hers on wellness in the city of Malden. She's doing her consultancy. And boy, I tell you, the data it's just eye-opening about what people are going through. So, just to conclude this morning, sometimes you have to laugh rather than cry. So this week it was, can you top this at Gardner Webb? Now, this is not everybody who has left. I've heard ridiculous numbers. I can't tell you that, but from the people that I come in contact with, here's the can you top this at Gardner Webb this week. So in our office, we had both of our office people to leave us this summer, and our admin staff. We hired one back, and she worked 15 days and quit. So and this is just this semester. So, can you top this? Well, the registrar, she had one of her people, assistant registrars, got sick with COVID and her husband, and she didn't come back, and they hired her replacement. And he lasted 14 days and quit. And then they hired one in his place, and she lasted 9 days and quit. And then we had in the business office, again, people that I know, 5 days and quit. And then accounts, 4 days and quit. But the topper this week was the bookstore, who hired one who lasted till lunchtime and quit. So we've got 15, 14, 9, 5, 4, and a half a day. That's just within the last 3 or 4 weeks, folks. 15, 14, 9, 5, 4, half a day. Now, we've had more to leave than that, but that's just people that I know. And so we don't have any admin. So the School of Business loaned their admin over to the registrar's office. So the School of Business has no admin now. And so we just don't have any back office help anywhere. And so yesterday, as EPSC chair, I got yes, we need a culture change study. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so yesterday at 10 o'clock in the morning, I got an appeal from Misha, the dean of the. Now, Misha's a personal friend of mine. Full disclosure here. And so Misha sent me an appeal form at 10 o'clock yesterday morning from a student. And she said, I need a decision by close of business today. I'm sorry. And so I had to contact the subcommittee of the EPSC. I'm the chair. I had to contact them for a decision yesterday. She said, I'm sorry, but this just slipped through the cracks. This student needs this waiver on the number of credit hours, or she can't graduate this semester, and we'll have to pay for a whole nother semester. And we start a mini semester on Monday in the School of Business, and we can give her the class that she needs. We told her we would do that this summer, but nobody followed through. to make sure that she could do that. And she got in touch with me today and said, in my class, starting class on Monday, I hadn't heard anything. She said, we just dropped the ball. I mean, that's what happens. That's the real life implications of these things. Yeah, it's humorous to say 15, 14, 9, 5, 4, half. Until you realize that the reason why the ball dropped is because business loaned their admin to the registrar's office. And that's how, and the out and the results of that, a student got left behind. These resignations have real life implications, and that's why the well-being of leadership, because you worry that things like that are going to happen. On a side note, when we got through with, I was in the business building this week doing my committee work. We got done. Misha's on the committee, and I stopped by her office. I came by and she had her head on her desk. And I said, you need to go home. She said, I'm going to try to finish up some paperwork. I'm having to do all the paperwork here. And I said, yeah, it's good when you're home, but you got to go home sometime. Sometimes you just have to leave it. She said, I'm just exhausted. I'm just exhausted. So to Jamaica's point this morning, you know, there's a reason why you're losing these people. And you've got to look at the culture. That is exactly right. Couldn't said it better myself. That's what we're talking about, the culture. Is your organization practicing ethical leadership? If not, people just won't stay. They just will not stay. They'll find something else to do somewhere else to do it. They don't find the bottom line is they don't feel valued. Sending them a check doesn't matter. If they don't feel valued, if they don't feel respected, if you don't treat them with the honesty and integrity and equity, they just don't feel valued. On a slightly different note, I work to do a partnership with a school district, and we got it done. I mean, it's been a political nightmare. That's where I was. Did Gardner Webb ever fill the DEI? No. We asked at the last faculty meeting. They said we're going to start. We're conducting interviews. Well, there's a reason why the last one didn't stay, but you know, a hot minute. But to my point, I'm going this afternoon. No, you're fine. Tim. I'm going this afternoon. We to do a photo op with that group. It's a big political thing in Gaston County. But anyway, I just do all the work, wrote the legal contract, and do all that stuff. They want to start their own leadership academy in Gaston County. They want to build capacity, and we're assisting in that. And when I say we're partnering, we're doing a buy one get one. We let them pick 14 and only pay for 7. And we're doing that to build capacity. You know, every time I recommend somebody to them, that not a good fit. We didn't think it'd be a good fit. But what does that mean? I don't understand what a good fit means. We're not getting who we want. Well, I sent you who you needed. Y'all just weren't smart enough to hire him. So I said, I said, what if we let you pick? So I moved heaven and earth and got this program done and had to write a contract. I mean, it's been a monster. So here's your question this morning. They picked 14 people. They have a real problem with finding African American males for leadership positions. So it's going to be a grow your own initiative. So here's the over under this morning. How many of those 14 were African American males that they picked? We told them, we'll take whoever you send. You pick. You know, you have an issue, you don't, you know, your culture, you don't match your population, your administrative group doesn't match your population. We'll let you pick. Over under. The over under is 1. That would be, you could say they picked more than 1 or none. What is your guess that they picked this morning? That would be 0. How can I help you if you won't help yourself? You're having this turnover, you're having this great cultural war in your schools. You can't, I recommended you the best candidate that I've ever had. You know, I recommended him, he was willing to come. Y'all interviewed him, thought he was the best thing, and then you just ghosted him at the end. And I call you and ask, why didn't you hire him? Well, we didn't think he'd be a good fit. Well, what does that mean? Other than he's a black male, I can't figure out what the problem is. He's the best candidate I've ever had. I let you grow your own. How many black males do you pick? None. What's wrong with you people? We'll do anything to fix the problem except actually address the problem. And that is the heart of ethical leadership. I'm using that as an example. That's the heart of ethical leadership. That's the heart of culture wars, is I'll do anything to fix the problem except actually fix the problem. I won't do that. You know, that back to that, well, you quit preaching and now you met it. You have this problem, you have this turnover. It's been identified for you that this is your problem. I've given you an opportunity to address it. I sent you people. No, won't do it. I've given you an opportunity to address it. And so Candace has a great question. So do you really want to fix the problem? No. Unethical leadership wants to just give the appearance of fixing the problem. Now, I don't want to get into a debate this morning. Y'all might reach through the screen and poke me in the nose. But we've had one of the best examples of the appearance of fixing the problem that I've ever seen in my life. The wall. The wall. I'm going to build a wall. That's only an appearance of fixing the problem. That's what we're talking about. That's kind of thing. A symbol. I'll do this symbolic thing and that will fix the problem. Immigration is much deeper than who crosses the border in Mexico. Net immigration from Mexico that way is actually 0, has been for several years. As many people go back as come. That is not a problem. But the wall was symbolic. If we do this, it will fix our immigration problem. It won't even start. People overstaying visas is a much bigger problem than exactly right than people come walk across the border. I mean, immigration, I mean, what an oversimplistic view. And I can't tell you how many times I've told people this. A few years ago, when it's been, gosh, I tell you, time gets away from me. I was in that part of the world for an extended period of time, 22 years ago, in 1999. Gosh, I can't believe it's been 22 years ago. You know, from Charlotte, you fly to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta, you fly to El Paso on Delta. You get to El Paso and you think, did I land on the moon? No trees, just dirt, hot, windy. Oh my Lord. And the smell, just put a beat down on you. Between the heat and the smell, the first few minutes you're there, oh my Lord. Now, you know, El Paso is on the Rio Grande, and you cross the bridge and you're in Juarez, Mexico, which is, how many million people live in Juarez? And just dirt roads, live in caves, side of the mountain, cars. The poverty there, the abject poverty there is just beyond the belief. but the thing that you see there, the terrain, you begin to understand it's a big mountain that goes around. If you ever watched any of those bowl games or ball games from El Paso, UTEP, Texas El Paso, they used to have a bowl game there, and the mountains behind and all that. But what they don't show, there's a movie on now on HBO, The Step Brothers, and they're flying back into El Paso in a plane, and you see the terrain there. But when you go out there and you see it, you begin to understand that it would cost billions of dollars a foot to build a wall through that. It'd be impossible to build a wall through there. Now you can put up a fence out in the middle of the desert where it's flat, but people just go over it or around it. But there's probably 100 miles there through El Paso and through there that it would be a bigger engineering feat than building the Great Wall of China to put a wall through there. You go out and look and see that, and it dawns on you, well, this isn't a solution at all. There's no way humanly possible in human engineering that you could build a wall through this 100 miles. And so I just walk around the end because you can't build one there. It's impossible. But that's kind of, that's a one-off tale. But the notion here is it's not possible to build, and if you did, it's not the problem. Again, we'll do anything but fix the real problems. We'll look for symbolic things. And so, as I said, I'm going to Gaston. I'm going over to the Staff Development Center this afternoon. We're doing a photo op, and that's what this is. It's iconography, I guess. We gave you a chance to fix your problem, but how can we develop this for you if when we gave you the opportunity and gave you half off to pick the people, and you got COVID money to pay your half where it's free for the people, free for them, and you got to pick. You employed the same process that never hires an African American male to pick these people. So it's your culture here. You don't want to do that. In the end, we get what we tolerate, what we promote. Changing culture is hard, especially if you won't even try. And so in the end, DEOL is about organizational leadership. It's about using the numbers. It's just like, the list that I have for you on how to use qualitative and how to use quantitative and how to cheat. The whole notion here is if you're not an ethical leader, you can find a way to not really address problems or to address problems that don't really exist, or claim victory when you didn't, or hide your losses and your failures. Honesty has a price. Now, I'll tell you the backside. I was reading last night on servant leadership. They were talking about some of the drawbacks to servant leadership. People think you're weak, but the biggest is sometimes you pay the price if you're honest. When you tell the truth, the organization doesn't want to hear the truth sometimes. You're never a prophet or an expert in, what's the definition of an expert? Somebody that lives more than 40 miles away. You're never a prophet or an expert in your own hometown. You're just stirring up trouble. You quit preaching and now you meddling. And so everything we do, even in methodology, has to be rooted in integrity, honesty, ethical behavior. If not, we're wasting our time, and our organizations will fail. Let me say that again, our organizations will fail. The number one job that the leader has is to keep the organization alive. And you have to be willing to have critical conversations with people. You have to be willing to do the cultural things that you need to do to facilitate the people that you have. It's a difficult time. It's a very difficult time. I'll open up the floor for any comments this morning as we wrap up our reflection and we do the postmortem on our last case study, as we do each time we start. That's my thoughts on our last case study. It's bigger than just that little case study. The implications are much deeper and much wider. I'll open up the floor for anybody, for any rebuttal or anybody's concerns or their thoughts on our last case study.
Dr. Lim, I was going to, just as a follow-up to what you were talking about, I was going to say that in terms of ethical leadership, in terms of really changing organization, you was talking about African-American male looking for in leadership roles. You know, I would add to what you were saying, because you're spot on, and that is the numbers don't lie. And this whole region, the demographics are changing so drastically. And I've told in my organization, you better get ready. Like the guy said in the movie Jackie, well, 42, when they brought Jackie Robinson in and they were in the kitchen, and he said, the manager, I forget his name, but he said that Jackie's here and there are more coming. And so we don't want to prepare for it, but it's really coming, it's really here. And in Gaston County, for example, the African-American population increased, the Hispanic population increased, the Asian population increased, but the white population actually decreased by 4 points. And so it's almost as if we're not really looking at that and understanding that those who are in leadership roles are not looking or reflective of the community. That's a problem, because you can't make the best decisions because you don't know enough about this particular community anyway to really make great public policy. So that what you're saying, you're spot on. And unfortunately, organizations are going to fail because just like the case study we had today, Mr. Maine does not want to accept the feedback, doesn't want to accept the reality of the demographic change.
That's exactly it. And so what we slip into, and I'm not overstating the problem here, what we slip into is a system of apartheid. That's what the let's make America great, let's go back. That's what we're asking to do. We want to all of these rules and voter restrictions, and it's not just voting restrictions, but all these things that we're doing across the country are an attempt to go back, so that the minority can stay, can continue in to be in charge, ruling, leadership, whatever you want to call it. They can be in charge and govern rather than the majority, based on rules and laws and armies and police forces that enforce the system of apartheid. That's what we're talking about. Refusing to accept the reality of the changing society. I don't want it to be that way. I want to go back to a time before this. I want it to be like it used to be. Well, as somebody who's a little older than all of you, it didn't used to be that way either. It wasn't good times for why any person of color or a female gender would vote for this. I can't understand. I told you about the female comic that I saw, women of a certain age. Lady was dressed, she's a woman in her 50s, and she was dressed up, she was doing her comedy routine. And the note that struck me, she said, why wouldn't I want to go back to a time where all I really had to do was keep the house clean, fix 3 meals a day, and try to avoid a beating. Husband come home mad from work and just throw her a beating back in the 50s, and everybody, that was normal. Why wouldn't I want to go back to that? She was obviously being facetious. But I mean, do you really want to go back to a time when we treated people that way? No. The only people who do are the minority, that this is a system of apartheid. And we're using police and military to enforce that. We're just refusing to change, and we're digging our heels in. We're not being passive in our resistance to what the way the world is. We're being aggressive. We're going to legislate. We're going to do whatever it takes to try to stay in charge. and the demographics of Gaston County is changing. We're trying to help them with their issues and problems, but in the end, we can only help you if we'll accept it. If you know, the same system that won't pick an African-American school principal is the same system they use to pick their next 14 leadership candidates, and they didn't include not one African-American male and only 2 males altogether. How can I help you? You know, if you get a bad outcome, it's a bad process. Change the process. Now we use the same process to select these people as we do our administrators. Well, then I can't help you. That's what you want. It didn't happen by accident. Your process predetermined. That's one of the ways to cheat the data. Your process that you pick predetermined the outcome. It's the same process that never picks an African-American male to be in the leadership role. You use the same one to pick these people as the future leaders. That's what you wanted. You know, it wasn't an accident. This is what you wanted. I don't know, you know, we just followed our process. Well, you know, it doesn't matter what your intent was. In the end, your process never picks, it's amazing, never selects one, never. And you use the same process, and you're shocked that you didn't get one through this process. No. What's Arger's double loop theory? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But see, the problem with that is they weren't expecting a different result. They didn't want a different result. Had they wanted a different result, they'd have used a different process, but they didn't want a different result. All we can do is try.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's just like it's a general question, but how? And then I'm not familiar with the western part of the state, like geographically.
Yeah.
But how does I believe App State in Western Carolina cut into the African American students that would go to, I guess, to Gardner Webb, and also like the type of employees that would work at Gardner Webb? If I guess what I'm trying to see is like, how does that do that? Is that data taken into account? Like, well, we have these schools in the western part of the state that may be a better place for a person of color to be versus where Gardner Webb is, or versus where Western is. And again, I've never been really past Asheville, so I don't know. But I just wonder, it's like, is that data taken into account?
Well, as somebody who's from the West, I can tell you there are no African Americans in past Asheville. The only African Americans that I'm aware of past Asheville play football at Western. That's the only African American kids they have. Maybe a few in the band, but there is no African American population west of Asheville. There's some Native American population, and there's some Hispanic population in Haywood County, which is the next county where Waynesville is, right past Asheville, on the way to Cullowhee, out in Jackson. But there is no African American population there. The only African Americans are, there's no African American people that work at Western either. Appalachian's a little bit different. There's not an African American population in Watauga or Avery or Ash, the 3 counties in and around Boone. There's no African American population. You have to go back down the mountain off the Continental Divide, back down below 3,000 feet to get back down into Caldwell County in the north. Very small population there, but then further on down 321 till you get to Catawba County and Hickory. And so the counties surrounding both Western Carolina and Appalachian, there is no African American population. When I say there's none, I mean there's none. And so we don't lose students to them. We might lose football players to them, if you know, but we don't lose students to them. But you know, the irony is that we don't have a real African American population at Gardner Webb, other than athletes either. Even though we're in a county that is heavily African American, and our next door county, Gaston, David can tell you, you know, the African American population in Cleveland and Gaston are growing, but it's not at Gardner Webb, and neither is our employee pool at Gardner Webb. No. You know, we have to import people in. In the School of Ed, Sharissa Simpson, she's from Durham. Dr. Bullardine, he came most recently from Durham. He moved to Gaston County because that's where the African American population, there's a bit large population there. But we don't hire those folks, and we don't get those students. If you see a kid at Gardner Webb of color, they play a sport. We pay them to be there. We don't get students of color. That's not a thing for us. We don't get a lot of employees of color either, because that's, you know, we're in Cleveland County. You just don't do that. To the exclusion of that. But you know, I've lived and worked in that part of the world, and I've worked in Charlotte, and I've worked in the East. But somebody pointed out in the chat, the African American population that is traditional and not transient, that moved in to like Charlotte and Gastonia, which is a bedroom community for Charlotte, is in Eastern North Carolina. That's traditionally where those community, Princeville, out there on the line between Johnson and Wayne counties, as you go from Smithville, Selma on 70 into Goldsboro, that's probably the most historic Black community in North Carolina. Been there since the 1700s. You get all of those traditional communities that have roots back centuries are east of 95. I-95, they're east of that, or in that area further east. In the northeastern, Northampton, Elizabeth City, in the south, Fayetteville, Cumberland County, all the way down into Brunswick, Columbus. Those are where your historic African American community, the roots that run hundreds of years, that's where they are. There are a few in and around Charlotte. Barber Scotia College was founded, Livingstone, Salisbury. As you head that way, Stanley County, those for the Piedmont, those are. But there are no traditional African American communities in the western part of the state. Once you start up the mountain, go up the Continental Divide, which runs, of course, diagonally across the state, along with the Blue Ridge Mountains. As you get up the mountain, and you literally go straight up the mountain, and go from anywhere from, you go basically from 1,500 feet to 3,000 in just a couple of miles to go up the top of the mountain. You can go up 26, or you can go up 40, or you can go up 321 and do, you know, but you got to go up on the mountain, as you know, to really get into what we consider to be Western North Carolina. There are no traditional African American communities at all in that part of the world. None. So UNC Asheville, Mars Hill, Appalachian State, Western, none of those schools have any tradition of an African American community around them. None. And the problem that we have is there's a lot of schools and community down in the flatlands, from the Piedmont to the east, that look at those admiringly and think, we'd like to be like them. Let's go back. That's just a sad but true tale. And so when I go to, I'm at home in Lake Norman today. When I go to my condo in the upper part of Rutherford County that borders both Henderson and Buncombe right above me there, just a mile or two up Cedar Creek. When I go there, it's only about 1,500 feet, 1,600 feet in elevation. I'm sitting right now at 770 feet of elevation here at Lake Norman. The shoreline of Lake Norman is at the 760 on the elevation mark, and it's in the backyard. The lake's right here in the backyard. I'm about 10 feet above the lake. When I go to Lake Lure, it's about 1,500. But I tell folks, you know, as you go, the population goes with the elevation. The higher it gets, the more wide it gets. It's the way it works in this state. You go the other way to sea level, you know, you see a more diverse population, and that's the way it works. The population goes with the elevation in North Carolina, and we want it to be that way. There's a reason why it's that way and why we've enforced that, and we want it to be that way. And now the western counties are they're the ideal. How can we be like them? Bring in a few Mexicans to do the manual labor, and then, you know, other than that, you know, we want to be like them. And there is a great movement afoot to go back to a time that used to be, but only people that look like me were facilitated in that time. I'm the only person on the screen that in the 1950s would have been happy. I'm the only white man in the group. I'm the only person that would have been facilitated. The rest of you folks would have been out of luck in the 50s. I know I wasn't very old, but I remember them. You know, it wouldn't have been too good a time for you. And my last story on that was, even in that time, you know, voting rights before the Civil Rights and the Voting Act rights of '65. I'm reminded that not many folks in the African American community could read. It was actually illegal to teach folks to read, but then that was, you know, they had a poll tax, but they would have a reading test, and said, you know, an African American man showed up at the polls to vote, and he could read, and so they handed him a newspaper in Chinese and said, "Here, read this newspaper." And he said, "Well, I'm not quite sure. I can't really make out all this, but I noticed down here at the bottom it says, 'Won't no black folks be voting today?'" And that's literally what we're asking people to go back to. And this notion of make America great and let's go back, that's what we're talking about here. It's a culture war. And this culture has permeated our organizations. And it's our job through data and ethical treatment and ethical data to show folks that we'd be better off if we changed and did the right thing organizationally. We can cling to the values of the past and we can go out of business. Or let me show you this data on how we can improve, adapt, and get better, and we can survive. That's the notion here. You use your powers for good rather than evil. I told you that the very first time that I met with you. The whole point of this course is to teach you enough that you can use your powers for good rather than evil, to make changes, to fix organizations. If we can fix the economy drives our country. There might have been a time when churches drove our country. I wish it still did, but it isn't. Organizations are now our church. They are now our social. They now drive our economy. If you want to affect change, you've got to do it through organizations. Organizations are the people who put pressure on governments and society and politicians to do the right thing. It's organizations and their clout that determine many times public policy and behavior. It's organizations. It's organizations. So we've got to always remember that. Let's work through the back half of Salkheim this morning. I'm going to do it quickly. So I will share my screen and get started. Let me copy that. So I won't lose it, and I'm gonna put it. I'm gonna put it here. And so today we're going to put that there. Oh, I still have it. I should have put it here. All right, so we're going to finish up Salcon today and do our case study. So let me quickly move through my Salcon. I'm not sure we're still getting the concept of significance. Let me open my screen up here. All significance is, when we talk about statistical significance at the 0.5 level, we're saying that there's less than 5% chance that no matter what we found was real and not due to chance or error. That's all it means. It doesn't mean it's meaningful. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about the degree of risk. We want 5% degree of risk or less chance that what we found it was due, that it was really real, that there was really a difference in what we found, to reject, the null hypothesis. Null says there's no difference. Is it related to confidence interval at 95%? Absolutely, it's related. Degrees of freedom tells us how much confidence we can have in what we found. Statistical significance says it looks basically at error. Did you make an error in your calculations? You can be 95% sure that your calculations are correct. Confidence interval goes back to degrees of freedom, which is how many variables were free to vary. Which means, did we get data from quantitative data from 5 people or 500? If we only got data from 5 people, well, how much confidence can we have in that? But we got data from 500 and our degree of freedom is much higher. We have much more confidence in that. We always work off 95%. We want 95% significant, which speaks to error and chance. 95% confidence, which speaks to how many people did we gather data from. It's the same thing. It's just two sides of the same coin. That's exactly right. We want to be sure in our data. Significance speaks to chance and error. Confidence interval, degrees of freedom, speaks to how many independent pieces of data did we pull together to make this determination that there was a difference. They fit like this. They are part and parcel. Now, we too many times confuse significance with meaningful. Meaningful means just that. Was it meaningful? There was a difference pre and post. We did a t-test. Kids scored 73 on the pre-test. We spent $1 million on a new reading program. They scored 74 on the post-test. It was significant, was no error, we're good. We tested all the kids, so our degrees of freedom was high, our confidence interval, good. but was a 1-point differential meaningful, considering we spent $1 million in that school for that reading program? No. You say, well, Dale, how big a difference would have to be for it to be meaningful? We'd have to see in terms of let's relate to things that we understand here. We'd have to see in excess of a 1 standard deviation change. That'd be 5 points. We'd have to see in excess of that. Now, if we saw a 20-point game, we'd think, well, maybe somebody put a thumb on the scale here. Remember the high school that did that? The principal, it was the miracle. It was like the shroud, the water stain of the baby Jesus and the shroud turn in Italy. It was a miracle, but nobody could see it. you know, but generally the rule of thumb is one standard deviation. If it's not one standard deviation, it's not meaningful. That's not enough. You're spending too much time or money on something that gives you minimal results. Minimal results. Kim, in your business, you know, what would be an acceptable or a meaningful result in your business?
I mean, it's sort of the same thing if you, invested in a certain professor or something as you consider testing students 5 points for one standard deviation. If the entire class average raised 5 points, that would be significant.
So my point is, we could ask David, we Melody, I used her example of public schools. In every organization, you've got to figure is what is your metric? Remember our first case study when we talked about social constructivism? What is the accepted standard in your business that you're trying to change? Schools, it's test scores. In college, it might be seeing class averages go up, or graduation rate, or retention rate. What is it you're trying to what is it you're trying to move? And then you calculate what a standard deviation of change would be. But now that may not already be there. You may have to work with a group to define what is success. What are we trying to move? How much? What would be successful? One standard deviation is simply is kind of a rule of thumb in test scores. But you might have to sit down with your organization and say, all right, in this social constructivism model, what is success? What are we trying to do? What would be improvement? What number are we trying to move? It may not already be as my point is with Melody. We know what the metric is, standardized test score. In elementary school, starting in 3rd grade, it's an end of grade test. We know what the metric is. It's all been standardized on the 100-point scale. So standard deviation is 5 points. We know that it's common in our business of public schools. The problem is what if you're in something besides public school? What is your metric? Well, we don't have one. Well, what did we teach you in the first, or hopefully you learned in the first case study? You may have to design that metric. What is it we're trying to move? In David's business, what is it we're trying to move? He's in city county government. Are we trying to save 5%? Are we trying to get, are we trying to increase public satisfaction by 5%? What are we trying to move? And you may have to, as the leader, put the group together to come up with, this is what's important. In most nonprofits, it's either how many we served or how well we served. And it might be a combination of both. But significance goes back, and confidence goes back to the process that you use. Meaningful talks about the results that you got relative to what you were trying to do and how much money you spent or how much time you spent. All of those things factor into meaning. Again, if I only got 1 point a game, which is 1/5 of one standard deviation, and I spent $1 million, it's easy to see in the school business that wasn't worth it. We don't need to do that. You have to figure out for your organization, what is your metric? What social constructivism, what is important in our organization that's measurable? How well or how many are the common things? But you've got to figure that out. Significance only speaks to and confidence interval only speaks to your technique, how well you collected your data and how many you collected it from. Meaningful speaks to the actual results. Did you move the needle? You got to get those concepts separated and so that you're sure on those. Too many times we think when somebody talks about significance that this is meaningful. This means something. It only speaks to technique. Yes, David, go right ahead.
Dr. Lamb, I'm trying to, how do they know after the NFL combine and teams base their decisions on the data that comes out of it? And they pay a player or NBA, National Baseball League, whatever the case may be, pay a player. How do they know that? I guess they wouldn't be doing the combine if they didn't think it worked, I guess. But how do they know in terms of, actually investing in the combine that it was worth it versus the pre-combine, era? I don't know if you know that off.
In my era, you just went and worked out for teams when you came out of college, but they did the same thing. Again, we know that in football, bigger, stronger, faster in a physical contact sport beats smaller, slower, weaker. We've known that forever. Old stopwatches and bench presses. You went and worked out for individual teams back then. And as they say in basketball, can't teach tall. We've known those metrics forever because they relate to success in the business. What's going on in all professional athletics now, and even in college now, is sabermetrics or metrics. The analytics guys. There was a big hullabaloo last week. The Toledo Mud Hens fired their manager. The Toledo Mud Hens are a AAA affiliate of the White Sox organization, I believe. They're their minor league farm team. They're the highest level in the minor leagues. AAA, next step is major leagues. And their manager had a great year, was manager of the year, won a lot of games, and they fired him. And there was people just all over the sports landscape that don't even know who the Toledo Mud Hens are, like me. It was a national story. But the underlying, the notion here is he didn't understand what the purpose of the Toledo Mud Hens was. He didn't understand their mission vision. He thought that his job was to win ball games. No, his job was to develop players for major leagues. That's the first mistake that he made. And the second mistake that he made was he didn't use analytics to determine. He played all of his best players all the time, and didn't understand that. And the ones that weren't the best ones, they never got the opportunity to play, to grow, or develop. And so the organization said, we're about analytics. The only way that we can do analytics is if they get on the field. We got to collect data on these people. We can measure how fast they throw or how high they jump or run, but unless we can get them in game situations, going back to the combine, what David was talking, if all the measurables that we have are just their physical attributes, we don't know how they can play the game. The whole point of the minor leagues is for them to play the game so that we can collect that kind of data on them. And he wasn't playing. He wasn't playing all the players, or he had his 8 position players and he played them all year. Well, there's a reason why he won his division. And what were the other teams that he were playing doing? They were playing different players all the time. No, he was running it like the whole purpose was to win the division. That wasn't the purpose of minor league baseball at all. We want these people to play so we can get some metrics on them. And he wasn't playing them. how can we make an informed decision about these people if they never get off the bench? And so and the article I read was something about, we need data. His job was to play all the players, put them in positions to be successful, and let them play and see if they could play or not to win the division that he was in. That was immaterial to what they were there to collect data. It was basically a big experiment. That's what the minor leagues are. How do you play against people of the same level? We use that data to try to project how you'll do at the next level. If you never get off the bench, we don't know. We have no data to try to determine if you can play at that level or not. The minor league system starts out with, you have the Cape Cod League, the Shenandoah Valley League, all these wooden bat leagues that college kids play in. And then you go to rookie ball, and then A, single A, double A, and triple A. There's 5 different levels. And at each level, can you play with people at that level? And they gather all this data on that. And we can kind of project whether you can make it. Now, it's not 100% where you can make it in the big leagues or not. But if we have at some point along the way, if you never get off the bench, we've wasted our money on you. And so that's what analytics are about, is collecting data and projecting. We're not always 100%, but we take, we need, if there's not data available, just like with baseball players, if there's not data available, we created a minor league system to gather that data. Well, you can't do that in football. It's a contact sport and you would run. So what we did was we created college football, and that gives us all this data of how people perform against people at a similar level. Now, that's one of the reasons why I am a vocal critic of endowment games at the college level. Is Tim still with us? There he is. I am a vocal critic of endowment games at the college level. Why? What's an endowment game? Tim?
A money game.
Money game.
Schools, yeah.
It's a money game where a team of this level ability gets paid to go and take a butt kicking from a team of this level. Explain to me how that's good for kids. Explain to me how that data is relevant to anything. If we're trying to get a notion from colleges and we're running it on the up and up, how is it good for kids to go get beat 72-0 by a bunch of kids that are twice their size, faster, bigger, stronger, faster? The Appalachian going to the big house and beating Michigan was kind of an outlier, but it wasn't as much of an outlier as people thought or people think. Yes, they were a small college, but they were a great small college, and they don't have small players. They could play with big time people, as they had proven for years. They were the best at what they did. We're talking about 3 or 4 weeks ago where Gardner Webb had, what was it, Parents' Day, and they brought in Lincoln College of Pennsylvania. The smallest, it's the oldest HBCU in the country, but small. They don't even give scholarships. They are in the smallest division, so that we could guarantee a win that we paid them to come. And so that kind of, just like Alabama plays, 2 or 3 cream puffs during the year, they pay them, Clemson pay a team $1 million to do that. That kind of subverts the entire college football experience. It also, it puts the thumb on data. You add those statistics in that players had during those games, and you get an unrealistic vision of how they can actually play. You take and pad their stats in 2 or 3 or 4 games, you get an unrealistic vision of that player from a analytic standpoint. And so, but philosophically, I just, you're sacrificing your kids. I think that's awful. Then it's just gladiator school then. Feedback on that one?
I don't feedback. I don't when I was playing, like when Central would play Duke and we would get, smacked every year. As a player, I didn't like it. But on the other side of it, I kind of understand. I had some teammates who were able to use some of the highlights from the Duke game to be included with the highlights from playing the rest of the MEAC when the MEAC was strong at that time.
Yeah.
To prove when they went to the league that they had the ability to make plays against, I guess, big D1 ballers. And then a lot of the budget for football comes from those big games against Duke. At Central, our basketball team plays like Ohio State, a few of the power basketball schools, and even though basketball and football are two totally different sports, and anything can happen in the basketball game versus football is smaller error to lose.
Yeah, and that's why I was referring to endowment games in football.
Yeah,
because the disparities there. Yeah, basketball is that's different. Into that. But to your point, I like your point. It gave some of your teammates opportunities to show on film how they could compete against others. Problem is everybody is not able to compete. There might be 3 or 4 guys on your team who can, but the rest of them, it's not a good day for them.
Yeah, it wasn't a good day for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a good day for a lot of folks. Might be for a couple, but it's usually not a good day. And then what happens is kids start making business decisions, as Deon used to say. And that happened at Gardner Webb 2 or 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Who was it we were playing that was just brutal? I mean, they were just loaded and we weren't. And I went to the game and it was predictably bad. I taught on campus that day. And so I just went on to the game that evening. And I counted. We had 28 kids, 28 in white jerseys on the sideline. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, is they're the kids who are ineligible that day because they're hurt. And so they had a pretty good game of tag going on the sideline, throwing the ball and playing roughhousing. And I thought, there's nothing wrong with these kids. They didn't want to take the physical whipping and pounding that Gardner Webb wanted them to take to get a little money. And so they made a business decision. They all, Coach, I can't go today. Of that group, I'd say probably 5 of them were hurt. The other 23 just didn't want to get a whipping that day.
Are you sure they weren't redshirted?
No, I'm not talking about the red shirts.
Okay.
I'm talking about the ones that had the injury jerseys on that that they allowed to be on the sideline, not the red shirt kids. No, we had on the injury report that day, we had 28 on the injury report.
Wow.
And there was probably 5 of them that were legitimately hurt. Now
that speaks to the character of the team at that point. Like when it's time to go to war, you put your pads on and you go to war.
Of course you do, but that's why I made that reference to Deon. Business decision. That's lack of character. That's exactly what that is. But also, those kids didn't want to take that pounding. They didn't care that Gardner Webb was going to get the money. So, to get back to the bigger issue here, those kinds of games and those kinds of situations skew your data. Or like what was happening in baseball, not playing, we didn't have data for analytics. We need to see data that is closest to live, real-time expectations of what you're going to be doing in your job. The combine just measures your measurables. It doesn't tell you how well you can play. We need to see you play. That's the thing about baseball. We need to see you play against people of your own level. That's the whole notion. That's why I don't like endowment games. Is we're sacrificing some kids. We're supposed to, if we're trying to collect data, if that's the whole notion, what good is the data from you're playing kids not at the same level? It kind of blows that whole competitive thing about, the lessons you learn. Well, the lessons you learn is when the big boy comes to town, fake an injury and stand on the sideline. Unfortunately, we force people sometimes into unethical behavior as organizations through our unethical behavior. We should not be taking money for our kids to go and physically sacrifice themselves. That's organizationally, that's not a good way to do things. We shouldn't be sacrificing our employees in any organization, not just in sports. So let me move quickly.
Dr. Lamb, if I could add a little bit as you put to the screen, and with Tim probably chime in, and that is, I think when I think about the college, I know what you're saying, training for the NFL, but I think, and I know you would agree with this, it's also about dollars in terms of analytics. And I wonder, and I often think about this, in around 1969, 1970, and you were talking about it earlier about change. Paul Bear Bryant, the former coach of Alabama, saw Sam Bam Cunningham, who played for USC.
Mm-hmm.
And he scheduled a game. Now he's using analytics, and they're already filling the stadium, but they're not necessarily winning the way they want to. So
He wants to win national championships.
He wants to win national championships. So they scheduled a game with USC, a more progressive school that had African-American players. So for me, what I've been thinking over a number of years in terms of analytics is dollars. Big house games at Winston-Salem State University used to pack the house. And what people don't realize, there were a vast majority of whites and Caucasian who attended those games. So when you look at analytics from that perspective, I often think, Dr. Lamb, if these schools, these players like Earl Monroe, who could not play for mainstream schools, were there. But someone analyzed it and saw, hey, if we can get us a Sam Bam Cunningham, if we can get us an Earl Pearl Monroe, we can increase our dollars, we can increase our winning percentages. And so HBCUs are left with, well, you're talking about Lincoln in Pennsylvania, are left with, I'm using the term not negatively, but marginal type players, because that's what's available. So analytics can be used, I think, in a number of ways. And that's something, Dr. Lamb, I've been thinking about since, I watched the documentary and did doing some research. You're talking about something meaningful in terms of money value. Pre-integration of football sports, the amount of money the HBCUs were making, and after integration of post-test, I don't know the answer to that. That's a big thing to tackle. But I'm interested in the amount of dollars that HBCUs have lost over the years in losing players to mainstream schools versus mainstream schools getting those players to come to play for, so like a North Carolina Central, and build that footprint and infrastructure. My brain is always thinking about stuff, and that's probably too deep. But
well,
anyway,
I can speak to some of that, but it'd take a day, so I won't. But the issue becomes, it becomes that the powerful use economic forces to beat down the less powerful, and the currency here is players. But now there's been some wonderful stuff written recently about a couple. Who was the basketball player that went to an HBCU and it didn't work out? He got hurt, but the argument is that some of these kids ought to go to the HBCUs and do them, but do they really have the infrastructure in place to handle these kinds of kids? Who was the basketball player that did that last year, right prior to COVID?
I think his last name was Baker. He went to Howard University.
Yeah, that's it.
Also, hearing this example reminds me of in last class when my group went. I talked about the Lions. The Lions, like I said, they talked about their season where they lost, so they were a bad organization.
Yeah.
The NCAA and every athletic department is just as much as a business as, you know, professional teams. Like at the end
Yeah,
of the
sure they
day,
are.
getting beat, but you know, we got beat, but we got $1 million to go towards our new turf field and all these different projects that we have. We have 4 money games, so that's $4 million that's
Mhm.
coming in. So it's like, is it a loop? You know, what's more important, the money or the players? Because when it's time to play the teams that we're supposed to beat, it's time to winning is the most important thing. When we play A&T, we need to beat them, but when we play Duke, we want to lose so we can make the money. But, you know.
Well, again, the problem I have with endowment games is we lose the whole notion. It all becomes about money. It might as well be professional sports. It opens the curtain on this notion of amateur athletics and competition and building character and all that. And then when we do endowment games, why do we not just see this is only about the money? This is not about any of those things. It's just being a minor league pharmacist. But that's exactly right. So the next thing I want to talk about is the difference between a t-test, a t-score, and chi-square. We get confused on these. All right. A z-score is when we know the mean and standard deviation of a standardized test score, and we convert it to a z-score so we can compare it to the score from another test that purports to measure the same thing but uses a different scale. Deol, that sounds awfully, what's that mean? All right, you've got 2 kids who are applying to go to college. The two accepted tests that we use that predict college readiness is the ACT and the SAT. We've got 2 kids. One took the ACT, one took the SAT. How do we compare them? Those are completely different tests on completely disparate scales. The ACT is on a scale of up to what, 50? SAT 1600. How do you compare the 2 scores? If you know the mean and the standard deviation, you convert them to a z-score, and then you know they're on a 1-to-1 basis. You know, one of them is 0.8, the other is 0.78. We can compare those 2. This one's higher than that one. That's what a z-score is. Z-score, standardizing scores that from tests that purport to measure the same thing. On our level, you folks and us sitting here today, it's GRE and MAT. Miller Analogies test is on scale is 100. They give you 100 analogies. How many you get right? Pretty simple. The GRE again has 2 sections that we count. 18, is 1600, 800 each. How do you compare a score of 41 on the MAT with a score of 1260 on the GRE? You simply use a z-score conversion, and it'll compare it on a 1-to-1 basis. That's a z-score. All right, now, what is a z-test? Well, that's to make sure that your population is normally distributed, that your sample matches your population. You say, well, Dale, that's what chi-square does. Absolutely. But chi-square works on survey data where it's just opinion. A z-test works on a score from a validated measure, a test score. That's the only difference in the 2. They do the same exact thing, except the data is different. When we give a survey that's people's opinion, all right, this is a z-test. We're gonna get the t-test next. Start with z-score. Z-score is we convert standardized scores so we compare them. All right. Z-test, we test our data to make sure it's not from an outlier group. We pull a sample from a population, we give them a math test where there's a right answer. 2 + 2 = 4. There is a right answer. We give them what I call a right answer test, a quantitative test that there is a right answer, not their opinion. How do we know that that sample represents that larger population? Again, the whole point of research is when we pull a sample is that they have to be representative of that larger population so that we can, in the end, do what with our data? Generalize our findings back to the larger population. These concepts of validity and reliability, this is that concept of sample. I told you, all the world is sample and population, folks. Everything in the world can be described by that. I can relate everything in the world to sample and population. Just like all you folks who are in the teaching business, all curriculum is content and process. That's all it is. That's simple. All research is sample and population. We're always wanting to relate what we found back to the larger population. If we give kids a math test, we pulled a group. How do we know that that group is representative of that sample of that larger group, the population? We give them, we run a z-test. Now, if we give a survey, we pull a sample, we give a survey to them of their opinion. How do we know that that group is not an outlier? Very simple. We do chi-square, and it compares our findings to a theoretical normal distribution and tells us if our group is an outlier or not. Same thing as a z-test, but the test, there was right answers. Chi-square, it was just opinion. You got to make sure you understand the difference in those. And then to David's point, t-test. The next step along the line here then is t-test. T-test is basically a pre and post test. We pulled our sample now. We have our sample of our population. We give them a pre-test before they scored 50. We give them whatever we're going to give them as our treatment, what we do to them. Then we measure them again. Now, I hesitate to say this because everybody gets this part wrong. What we're trying to determine is if they're the same group as they were before the treatment. You say, well, Deol, we're just talking about one group. How can they not be the same group? Technically, in research, if we get an effect from the treatment, if they change, they're not the same group as they were before. That doesn't mean the membership's not the same. It means they don't display the same characteristics as they did before. You change them. And what's the whole point of a treatment? To change them. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change them. We're trying to change their behavior, their knowledge level, fill in the blank. We're trying to change them. And so technically, after the treatment, if we see any results, they're not the same group. And the reason why I say that is when you read the literature, it uses that terminology, and that's where everybody gets confused. And I simply say, the whole point of the pre and post t-test is see if there was any effect to your, if you got any results from whatever treatment program or fix you instituted. All right, wait a minute, Dale. You said something there, and I'm not sure I understand. What is a program, a treatment, or a fix? That's what we're going to do to these people. We pull this sample from the population. We measure their height, weight, test score, whatever. We put in a program, treatment, or a fix, and then we measure them again. And we as consultants, that's our job, is to program, treatment, or fix. What program, treatment, or fix will change what we won't change. In schools, it's instruction. That's the treatment that we give them all. So what's the difference between a program, a treatment, or a fix? You will see that terminology used in research studies. And I so here's the rule of thumb on program, treatment, or fix. A fix is something that you do in your process, something administratively. We change the way that we do this. We write a new policy. I told you I'm head of the Ed Standards and Policy Committee. We're having a little issue right now with students who come to us for a second baccalaureate. They're mostly in the School of Ed to get a license, a teaching certificate or whatever. And so they're not being successful because we haven't updated our policy. Our policy is the same as it was before we made some changes academically. We've got to update our policy to reflect the change. So here's what I mean. We've moved from 128 credit hours to graduate with a baccalaureate degree to 120. All right. Start with that. Then that's just for the students who are there. You said, Dale, you're talking about people who come for a second baccalaureate degree. Okay, hold on. What is 20? So, and with that, we moved our how many course credits you have to get at Gardner-Webb to get a Gardner-Webb degree. We moved it from 50% down to 25%. So we could take somebody who's got a accredited 4-year degree from somewhere else. They can come to Gardner-Webb and do 30 hours, 30, not 32 now, because again, we moved our number of credits from graduation from 128 down to 20. A fourth of that is 30. Previously, it was 64, and then it became 60 when we moved to 120, and then when we moved from 50% at Gardner-Webb down to 25%, it moved from 60 to 32, and now it's got to be 30. For people to come to Gardner-Webb and do 30 hours and graduate, because we have a lot of folks who want to get a teaching certificate that have a degree in history from somewhere, and they want a teaching certificate. They're not going to come and do 64 hours, and then we've got it down to 60, but then 32, now down to 30. We've got to change the policy. We've got to fix the policy. And what's going to happen is when we fix that policy, guess what's going to happen to the number of people that will come to Gardner-Webb for a second degree? It will explode. We've already seen it. That's the whole notion. We're trying to fix this. The president said, why aren't we getting any transfer students or any second degree students in? Well, because our policy. They got to do 64 hours. When we get them in and they want to do this and we start academic advisement, the first thing they hear is 64 credit hours. How many people are going to sign on for 64 credit hours, to get their teaching license? They say, I've already got a degree. And you're going to make me do 64 hours? So we needed to fix a policy fix. We had to figure out what is our barrier here. So now we're going to measure how many we had before and then after. It's a simple t-test to see, to see the efficacy of changing all these policies that we've been changing. The core 128 to 120, the number. We're going to find out now. The last piece of this fix, of this fix, the last piece fix is again programmatic, is to get all of our policies in line now with the registrar who grants degrees in colleges. That would be the registrar. So we had the registrar in the meeting this past Wednesday. Now we put all these pieces together. We've worked through all these different policies in EPSC. Been a 3-year process, or this is the 3rd year of all changing all these policies. This fix to where now you can come to Gardner-Webb with a 4-year degree in hand, and 30 hours later, you have a second degree in the area that you wanted it, where you can get a licensure for the job that you want. That was the problem, but we had to work through all of these things to get there. So that would be a fix. All right. A program is when we bring a canned program in, it's pretty simple. Melody's in the 5th grade business. 3D reading that's a program. We started it with different school districts started using 3D reading program. And then pretty soon the state adopted it statewide. But 3D reading started out as a program from a private company. We have this problem. Here's this program. Again, what we got to make sure we do is it's implemented with fidelity. We talked about that, formative assessment. Somebody has to go and check and make sure that we're doing it just like the company said it was. Program is kind of a canned thing. And then a fix is more, a program is we buy this program and we implement this program with fidelity. A fix is something in our policies or our process that is precluding us from getting the results that we want. And then a treatment is on a smaller level. It's usually more organic. We have figured it out. It's more custom to the problem. It's what I talked about. You got as a consultant, you've got to resist a solution hunting a problem where you got this canned solution no matter what. This is your standard go-to. You've got to customize a treatment based on the data that you get. So basically what we do as consultants, we work mostly with treatments. It's custom to the organization. We gather the data and our action plan is based on that organization. And there may not be a canned on the shelf product that we can buy. We have to craft a treatment for them, which takes much more expertise than just shifting a few policies, having a policy walk around and shifting a few policies or buying a canned on the shelf. Your job as a consultant is to craft that treatment, which is much higher level, requires much more skill and ability, much more knowledge. Programs, treatment, fixes. Treatment by far is the hardest, requires the most, it requires the most skill and ability and hard work to figure out what is that treatment, what will work for this group, what can we do. In the case of wine, that case study, the previous consultant, in an organization of 6 people said, here's your problem, that had a program, organizational chart, fill this out and solve your problems. That was a solution hunting a problem. What do you want to bet the next organization that consultant goes to? What will she say their problem is? You need an organizational chart. How in the world would you need an organizational chart when everybody in the organization can ride to work in one car? But that's all she knows. Programs, treatment, fixes. All right. We'll come back at 10 minutes till 11 and we'll do our case study. I will see you then. And we're back. All right. Before we start, we'll finish up the last segment right quick. To the point that I made, I did some quick numbers right quick. Let me share my screen. To Tim's question, this is what Western North Carolina looks like. Clay County, which is the furthest west county in North Carolina, 2.2% African American. Ashe County, the furthest west in Northern County, less than 1% African American. Jackson County, where Western Carolina is, the county doesn't report any African American residents, 2.1 because of the kids at Western Carolina, and Watauga, where Boone, where Appalachian is, 1.74%, and all of them are at Appalachian as well. There are no African American communities in Western North Carolina, not on top of the mountain. There are none. Population, goes with elevation. Now, if we went to the other end of the state, it would look exactly the opposite. And so that's the sad but true tale of North Carolina. But those are the census numbers I just pulled for that. All right, quickly. Where do I want to go? 12. Yeah. We covered T-test, got that. 13. All right. So quickly to end up, if you want to compare results over 2 or more groups, instead of using a T-test, you simply use an analysis of variance. It does the same thing, but it's just if you're doing 2 or more groups. If you're doing 2 groups, you do analysis of variance. If you're doing more than 2 groups, you do multiple analysis of variance. But it does exactly the same thing as a T-test. It compares before and after, or tells us how much variance. It's an F test rather than a T-test. It just means more than one group. All right, so 14, we've got that. Again, 2-factor is generally what we use. Correlation coefficients. Again, we talked about that earlier. Just as a reminder, 0 -1 to +1. And correlation doesn't mean causation, but remember, we can calculate how much one thing is related. If you remember heat, ice cream, crime, how much of the variance of one is due to the other. Again, we have to make sure that we don't fall in the trap of heat, ice cream, and crime. We can oversimplify when heat and crime rise at the same time. I mean, ice cream consumption and crime rise at the same time. They're not correlated. The correlate is heat. We have to be careful. That's why we do these Pearson and Spearman to make sure that it's actually the thing we think it is. It's causing the positive correlation when one both go up at the same time, or the negative when one goes up, the other goes down. But we have to make sure that that's the cause. We run a Pearson or a Spearman to do that. Pearson is on nominal data. Spearman is on categorical data. So what that means, when we do categorical data is when we don't just assign a score, we put them in a category. High, medium, low, proficient, non-proficient. It's the same thing. It's just according to what kind of data you have. We've covered that. Prediction, that's a linear regression. We talked about the EVOS linear. We've done that, so we've covered that one. 17, chi-square. Again, we run chi-square to make sure that the sample that we pull from the population, when we give them a survey and ask their opinion, that they're not an outlier group. That's all chi-square is. And then our last one that we've already covered is, and I ask you in one, make sure that you're using validated sources. Don't go somewhere and get one of these political sites and get political things. So we've covered everything. I know it sounded just like a rant because it was a rant, but we've covered everything in this Alkine book. We've covered everything that you need to know on the quantitative data. Now, again, analysis of variance, those things, you can just Google those and plug the numbers in. The actual calculus, I'm not that interested in, because that's the easy part. It's knowing when to apply these things and how you apply them and what they mean. And know when somebody's pulling your leg, or they're using something that to support their argument. They're cherry picking, or they're using statistics and data incorrectly to sell you a bill of goods that doesn't exist. That's what you're supposed to know. And so actually we're done 5 minutes early, so it's time for case studies. So who was the middle group last time? So Melody goes first. All right, take it away.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I think you all know by now that our group consists of Heather, Melody, and myself. And we chose the second case study for our presentation, which was on utilizing exploratory qualitative data collection in small organizations. Specifically for this case study, it was consulting for the multicultural community connections. So to kind of give you a little background information on this case study, it starts with Olivia Johansson. She is the program director for Multicultural Community Connections. She is a first generation immigrant, and she is passionate about making sure newly located immigrants are adequately socialized in the community. And she also wants them to be aware of the resources that are available to them and their family. Her latest project is Bridges, which is a 6-week summer camp. And she had 3 purposes for starting this camp. She wanted to provide a fun and safe environment for children during the summer. She also wanted to promote awareness of diversity for teachers while helping them satisfy their continuing education requirements. And she also wanted to provide local college students hands-on experiences as they work with teachers and children. She's assigned 2 of her full-time employees to this Bridges camp, Laura and Isabel. She has 5 teachers, 4 who are female, 1 is male, and they are made up of 2 African American teachers and 3 European American teachers. She also has teacher assistants who either speak Spanish or they want to be teachers. So that's the staff that she's made up to work with the Bridges Summer Camp. The camp has just completed its first week and it has 45 students enrolled, but it is already experiencing some major issues. The 2 full-time staff that I mentioned, Laura and Isabel, who are assigned to work with the camp, they are having a hard time communicating with teachers. You also have some inexperienced staff. Not all staff are bilingual, and that is leading to translation problems. And then you have parents complaining also. All of this has been brought to Olivia's attention, and in an effort to turn things around, she hires a consulting firm, a small consulting team named Integrated Solutions. The consulting team consists of 4 people, Jessica, Jamie, Nicole, and Brock. And in her meeting, in Olivia's meeting with the consulting team, she's telling them about the problems, but in her exact words, she says she needs the IS team to fix the damn problem. So keep in mind, this camp is only for 6 weeks, and they've already went through the first week. So they only have 5 weeks left to turn things around. So the learning objectives for this case study are to understand how to gather and use exploratory qualitative methods, to understand how to incorporate people's cultural worldviews into case study analysis, and then lastly, to practice addressing numerous stakeholders' perspective when preparing recommendations for the client. So now Melody will tell you a little bit more about the issues that are occurring at the Bridges Summer Camp.
We wish, Heather, will you go back to the other one for just 1 second? Thank you. There you go. Yeah, stick with that. Problems in data collection. One more to the right, if you don't mind. Okay, right there. We wish that this was a simple problem. We wish there was just one problem, but there is no easy fix. And we know as consultants, we can't address every single problem going on with the organization, but we did feel like it was important to outline them for you. So I'll do that first, and then I'll move into the data collection and how they did that and the benefits and the drawbacks to what they did. And our discussion questions centered around that data collection. Okay, next slide, please. All right, our central problem is Olivia had a great idea, right? She wanted a summer camp to build relationships with children, teachers, community, with people with diverse backgrounds, cultures, languages, religions, all of that. And so she threw people together and hoped they would learn from each other and about each other. But as Dr. Lamb has told us before, hope is not a plan. And so the problem here is there is no clear plan, no roadmap for this 6-week program to meet those goals that Olivia established for them. So there are some secondary problems that impact that, and I'll just outline these quickly. The lack of leadership. We know from Maxwell's work, law of the lid, law of buy-in, all these things are impacting the Bridges program. Olivia put 5 teachers there to moderate the program. There's no one point of contact, and they can't agree on how to run it. So that is definitely impacting. Then there are undefined roles and unclear expectations of the people there. The teachers had a written job description. The teaching assistants were just told to help the teachers, very vague. And when the consulting team was observing, in some rooms, the teaching assistant was doing what the teacher was doing in other rooms. So it was very clear that their roles and expectations were not clear to them. Sometimes some of them would show up for breakfast while others never came to breakfast. So even the expectations of their daily responsibilities. Lack of communication, they are having trouble communicating with each other and translating, having to go to the teaching assistants and even use the students as translators at times. And all of this is culminating in conflict within the staff, whispering about one another, rolling their eyes about one another. And in some cases, the cultural differences play a role in this, specifically one, the orientation to time, that some people time is compartmentalized. And with other groups, it's not. It's less compartmentalized. And this is a struggle with the schedule and what's happening on the daily basis at the camp. So now I'm going to talk about data collection and what the consulting firm actually did. So we all know that in qualitative research, there are 3 ways to collect data. We're going to review documents, we're going to observe, and we're going to interview. And we know that the point is to get to that insider, as the Merriam text calls the emic perspective. You know, we've got to be able to provide that to the person who's hired us. They want the insider perspective. So the team did this. They reviewed documents, and our discussion question said what documents were collected and what was the benefit of them. So they looked at job descriptions and policy manuals, and this gave them the expected roles and responsibilities of the people working at the camp. They asked for recruitment materials that were given to parents, training materials, evaluations of that week training that the teachers had. They asked for the daily schedule. And these all helped them see how the camp was designed and how employees were prepared prior to the camp. Now, these were beneficial. It did give them an upfront, unbiased perspective of what was going on. It helped them begin to see themes and patterns that they would want to look for in their observation and interviews. We did think that perhaps they should have asked to look at the curriculum being used to see if that curriculum aligned with the goals of the program, and also to look at any written communication that was going to be given to parents, because they discovered in observations that parents were receiving field trip permission forms only in English. And this was a problem that could have maybe been identified earlier on in the process. Secondly, two of the consultants went in to observe. And it's important to note that the consultants were bilingual. So even though teachers and teaching assistants were having trouble communicating with each other, the consultant as an observer really was able to hear and understand what was going on with all of the employees. Now they were participant observers, which is important because they had to get into the space to see normal activities and the interaction that was going on. They had to build rapport so that people would accept them so that they would act normal, that this wasn't an artificial environment. They would actually see what happened on a daily basis. And these observations would help them learn what questions they needed to ask in interviews and delve more into. Now, the discussion question mentioned that Jamie and Jessica couldn't remain passive observers during their observation, and at times they became part of the organization. And how did we feel about that, and how that impacted their ability to make observations? And we really did not see issue with their interaction and their ability to make observations. We felt like definitely Jessica was an insider. In fact, there was no pretending. One person whispered in her direction and rolled her eyes about the teacher that was teaching. So she definitely got to see the true interactions of the employees there. Now, the third thing consultants need are interviews. And although our case study said they were going to do interviews, there was no evidence of that in the case. And for us, we felt like this would have been an important part that they missed out on, because we needed to hear the perspective of different stakeholders. Interviewing a teacher or teachers, a teacher assistant, a parent, that would have given us insight into more about what was going on here at Bridges. So as I've mentioned, this isn't a quick fix, and there's no way to address all of these problems. So Heather is going to walk you through what we decided to do.
Awesome, thanks. So as y'all heard, this is a huge case study, and there were a lot of different problems that were in play here. So we decided to break up our solutions into short-term and long-term. Since the program is only 6 weeks and we're already into week 1, there's not really a lot of time to make a huge shift, but what are some small things that we can do to kind of help alleviate some of the concerns that are happening right now? So for our short-term recommendations, our goal is to just define the staff roles a little bit more. So even if TAs, right now their role is just to help the teacher. So what does that look like? So is your role to go to breakfast every morning with the students, that way they get to class on time? Is your role to take them to lunch, or is your role to kind of help clean up after class is over? So how can we define those staff roles a little bit more so there's not as much tension in place with the teachers and the TAs? We also found that we needed to appoint someone who was a lead staff member. And based on the 2 humans who Olivia appointed, if they're not bilingual and there's been some communication issues, then they may not be the best people to be in place at this moment. So we decided to appoint Olivia as the head person. She needs to be there when parents drop off, when parents pick up, and at some point during the day. That way, parents, staff members know who to go to if they have questions or concerns. We also want to make sure that all the materials are in Spanish and English, since this program is dedicated to helping students who are bilingual or students who just speak Spanish to kind of have a better experience. Their parents need to understand what's happening, so we need to have all the materials in Spanish and English. And that can be kind of a quick fix based off when they just need to have their field trip form, Spanish and English. We can do that quickly. And we also talked about doing an all staff retreat for like a 1-day reset. So after this week 1 is done, so we're gonna either like take that Saturday after week 1 just to reset, bring everyone together, because we found that even though she hired all these staff members, they've never all been in one place before for one training. So bringing them all together to meet everyone, to train and kind of get an understanding of who they are, what they desire to kind of accomplish, will kind of help bring up that team morale. So we said we can utilize the Saturday time that they have off, or they have a debrief time from 2:30 to 3:30 every day. We can utilize that hour to kind of reset what their job descriptions are, help them understand how the days are going to run, and give them just a better, clear picture of what their experience should be like. We also found that there were some parent complaints. A lot of parents are not kind of clear about what the program is supposed to accomplish, or they're having some communication issues with the staff. So we said we're going to just host a parent meeting. So we'll send out a survey before and ask them, or do like a little Dropbox of if you have questions or concerns before the parent meeting, so we can address those when the parents arrive, and also just give them time to ask questions and kind of help them feel better about bringing their children to this 6-week camp. So those are our short-term goals that I feel we can accomplish within those 5 weeks that we have left of the program. Our long-term goals, we want to be able to, when Olivia hires her 2 leads, they need to be bilingual so they can communicate more effectively with parents and students and staff. So that's for the next summer, summer 2. We also want to encourage her to have a large team training before camp even begins. That way the TAs meet the instructors, they can build a good rapport, there's an understanding of what the curriculum is going to be, and that they have a clear picture of the goals and how to accomplish those as a team, as a unit. We also want to have a family orientation because we found that some of the families or parents just didn't know what was happening. So if we can have an orientation before the camp begins, hopefully that will alleviate some of that confusion. We also want to do a family closing showcase that will kind of show the parents and families what their students got to accomplish and what their students did throughout the 6-week experience. We can kind of like brag on them and say, hey, I heard you did an awesome job. Here's what your kiddos learned. Celebrate and support them. And what we're gonna ask Olivia to do is look at the 5 key indicators, which is predicting, visioning, assessing, designing, and communicating, and ensuring that her plan is meeting all of those 5 things and that she has a clear picture of what those 5 things are. So predicting the number of students who might want to come to summer camp next year, that way you have enough staff to fully engage them. Assessing what you did this summer to see what you can edit, change, and delete. And then make sure that you're designing a plan that's going to be efficient and designing a curriculum that's going to actually accomplish the goals that you set in place. So those are our long-term and short-term recommendations. We feel that these will kind of help all the stakeholders who are in place with the instructors, the TAs, the parents, the students, and Olivia to kind of get a more well-rounded program and have a better experience to kind of help all the stakeholders feel that they've got something accomplished. Any questions, comments, concerns, feelings, thoughts?
Somebody, anybody? All right, go back 1 slide. All right. What a great job. And there's no but coming. What a great job. What is reflected on this screen is in long form the concept or notion or theory of social constructivism. How do we make sense of the world, and how do we agree on what's important for the context of this program? This is that defines social constructivism. We're defining the staff roles. They know what they know and agree what their job is. The staff retreat, the parent meeting, everybody gets input as to what is important, or we train people what's important. The kind of the central problem is when the person who designed this program, and that would have been the first thing when she said, I just want you to fix the problem. What I would ask her is, what are your metrics for success other than get people to quit complaining? What are your metrics for success? What is your social construct? It goes back to our first case study in the can. Everybody, all these different stakeholders have different things that are important to them. Have we factored all of those in? What are our measures or metrics for success? And then that's our social construct. How well we serve people, how many we serve. I mean, all those questions. Everybody knowing their roles, everybody being defined. That is the social construct. And when you see this screen, this is the actual application of that social construct. All these people, all these parts have to be there if we all know what we're trying to do and we actually have a plan. This is how we go about doing that. Staff has to know what they're doing, what's important. We have to have leadership. We have to be able to communicate. That's important. Again, all these are things that are important to the success. These are the metrics that are success of this program. We we don't always have an outcome that's simply measurable. In this case, we don't have a quantitative outcome. It's all qualitative. And again, it goes back to the difference between insider and outsider perspective. We need insider perspective, as was pointed out in the presentation. This is all qualitative work here. There's not some test score that we're going to give these, that we got to achieve with these kids at the end of this. That's not the point. It's not quantitative here. This is when it's all qualitative. So that means insider perspective, interviews and observations. Qualitative is interviews, observation. You're exactly right. There needs to be some interviews here. But this would be the process. Yeah, we got to do something quick. We need a quick fix. So that they'll send their kids back next week. But then we got long term, we got to fix the bigger issues. The bigger issues here is there was no social construct. There were no metrics for success. She thought it was just how many kids we get, and she thought that I guess the leader here thought that the metric for success was we get 45 paying customers. But that doesn't meet anybody's needs. That's not a plan. That's just hope. You've got to put a plan together. And again, in a lot of nonprofit or in the type of organizations, for impact programs that we have, you can stop your screen share now. We have to, what we define as success, getting 45 is not defined by anybody. We have to agree on what's important to everybody. And so this is how you put a social construct together. And a lot of social construct work is opinion. It's qualitative. It's that you get from observing and interviewing people. What do they think is important? And a lot of times it's not something that we can just quantify. So again, back to the notion that qualitative data is data, and it's the preponderance of evidence. And there's not always a number that can show success or failure. We have to get out, we have to dissuade ourselves of the notion that if we can't measure it with a number, then it's not real. That's not true. Opinion data is still data. We can't discount qualitative work and insider perspective. And we can't just project our values on everybody else. There has to, social constructivism means that everybody comes together and agrees. It can't just be what I think. And that's you can go ahead and stop your share now. That's part of the leadership conundrum. Is you as a leader have what you think is important, but if everybody else doesn't agree, the main tenet of leadership is followership. That again, talked about Maxwell. He has several of those of his laws that speak to that. You can only lead if people follow. And if you've not agreed on what the social construct of this organization or this program is, there will be no followership. And again, it can't always be about a number. Now you said, Deol, you said you're a numbers guy. Well, I am. But I also know that everything can't be solved with a number. I understand that. In the real world, we're not doing theoretical work. Remember, we're talking about action plan. We're talking about working consultants work in the real world. They don't go to an office and thump numbers every day and do theoretical models. That's not what they do. They work with real life people. This is an excellent example of how you go about defining that social construct that is that organization, that is that program. All the stakeholders have to be involved, and what they think and feel matters. It is data. Back to the notion that the standard in qualitative work is preponderance of the evidence, not the numbers, not some absolute number. Too many times there is no absolute number that is relevant to what we're doing. So then we have to go back to the qualitative work. which is valuable. It is ethical. It is professional. It does have merit. It does have value. And this is the case that exemplifies that. Excellent job. All right. Who's next?
Dr. Lamb up here.
Good.
All right, Dr. Lamb and Cole, we'll get started. We had a case of wine and assessing the organizational culture and Resolute Winery. And on my team is Jamiko and Blair. And so we'll start out by talking about the learning objectives, which were 3 of those from the case study: recognize and analyze simple but subtle clues of an organizational culture. And there were a lot of subtle clues. And Dr. Lamb, you were just talking about qualitative measurements. Some of those subtle clues were things that you couldn't measure, but they just came off the page and you recognized it. In terms of like just simply having someone else to pour wine in a glass, for example. Engage a client and develop a data gathering strategy. And Jamiko will be handling that part. And also analyze data and make recommendations to a client. So we're going to move into the case background. There were key characters and individuals that we'd like to point out, highlight. And there's Dr. Marlena Michaels, who acted as a consultant, at least a second consultant. Mr. Main is the owner of the winery. And you have Mary, who is an employee that is not allowed to pour wine. And Diane is the designated wine pourer in the case. Jennifer Bent is one former employee who quit after 1 week. She completed the only survey that Mr. Main took in. And Jillian and Bob are the 2 managers of the organization or the winery. Some of the key points we want to highlight, and there's a whole lot of points that we could, but in the essence of time, we will point out a few, and that is this business was started by Mr. Main's grandpa about 3 generations back. And the philosophy at the time was to keep it or make it a family environment. But what has happened here recently, business has been kind of sluggish, sales has been sluggish. And Mr. Main's dreams are fading of having a real family business. And part of the assessment is that the family vision doesn't necessarily match the current culture of the organization. So there's some alignment issues. Owner, Mr. Main, he says he can't put a finger on the issue. And so that in part is the reason why Dr. Michaels is hired to help him assess that. The owner says that the business is becoming just a place to work, just a job. It's no longer that family, quote unquote, family environment that they had dreamed of. And so Mr. Main, he's conducted a survey of his employees, and he doesn't appear to want to accept feedback. In particular, he perceives it as negative feedback from the survey. Some key intangibles we want to point out is we feel like there's a culture of hierarchy or layered organizational chart. Dr. Lamb, as you mentioned earlier, by this being such a small organization or a small workplace, is there really a need for an organizational chart, particularly this technicality where you have some people working here and one person is over one person. So we did look at that, examine that.
Well,
We feel like there is no real mission statement. We feel like Grandpa did have he had a purpose, he had a view of what he wanted, but it was to us more of a description than a mission statement. There's no real team work, family environment is based on daily actions. We really didn't know what the definition of the family atmosphere is, so everybody can understand what that is. The assumption is because he lost all the families, that he still couldn't have a family environment. We didn't think that was mutually exclusive in terms of the system. I coached a basketball team. None of us was related on my team, but we still had a family environment. We feel that all the work must be approved by Jillian and Bob, so there's a sense of control. And so there's no autonomy and no support for decision making by frontline employees. And we've seen an example of when Mary had to call Diane to come and pour. I hope I'm getting that, maybe get names mixed up. Come and pour the wine because it was 1 ounce. Mr. Main also doesn't like the fully present. He is the owner, but you don't see him in daily operations. He tends to stay away from that. So we'll move to discussion questions with the case number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I'll be brief. The first one was a reflection that Dr. Michaels had when she first came to the River Creek Winery in comparison to Resolute Winery. She saw with the River Creek, the employees very friendly, and they were doing multiple things. It wasn't just one person doing this. While Resolute showed more control and a lack of confidence in their staff. Those subtle things that we could see that basically communicated the culture of that organization to the customers. And the concern he had was that wine selling was down. Although I did mention that Resolute had more customers than the River Creek, but just because you have more customers doesn't necessarily translate in dollars sold. Number 2, after the interaction with Mr. Main, what data should Dr. Michaels gather, why, and how would we propose gathering data? Well, one of the things we thought that needed to be done was clarify what does Mr. Main think about what the mission statement should be now. Have Dr. Michaels contact former employees where possible for the past 2 to 3 years and assess the tenure of competitor wineries to establish a credible comparison. Also speak to family members who were former employees, if possible, and to see how it used to be. Also inquire vendors and suppliers. Surveying just current employees may be biased and discomforting, but by talking to suppliers and previous employees may help with that process. Number 3, problems with the Main approach in gathering data. In general, Mr. Main, his survey, he surveys the wrong people. He needs to survey employees who leave as well. Another thing about data is willing to accept what came out of it. Dr. Lamb, you talked about Garden Web last class about the survey results. It's about cafeteria. People were leaving it. Students were leaving because of cafeteria and dorm spaces. And that's not really what the data said. So he does accept feedback. It needs to survey former employees, vendors, stated that earlier. And the customer satisfaction survey doesn't go far enough, using a 10-point Likert scale. And depending on the questions, he may get a higher number. We think he needs to ask an open-ended question. For example, do you plan to return? Why not? And please explain if you do come back, why. If you're not probably going to come back, why. The last 2 questions is looking at the analysis of the data sets. We thought the data observation was good. It reveals real-time interactions. The company meeting doing that, we thought was good also because it showed the interactions, the social construction, whether good or bad in the meeting. And it also revealed sort of this hierarchy of control between the employees. And it also indicated who was engaged because somebody was on their phone or only a certain person brought a notepad to take notes. The employee survey interview, we thought that was good as well. Employees were more comfortable probably speaking individually to Dr. Michaels, but would expand to but we would say maybe if you could talk to former employees as well, where possible. We know that's not always possible. Values exercise was extremely revealing. because it confirmed Dr. Michael's hunch or belief that Mr. Main's, his main focus was on family, yet instead he doesn't give a full definition, a social construct of what family means. He seems to think because family left that you still can't have a family environment, but the family environment construct must be defined and dealt with and agreed upon so that everybody's operating off the same page. In fact, family was only mentioned by one of the person, that was Bob, and it said that Ann laughed when family was mentioned. In terms of summary report recommendations, and we'll get deeper with that with Blair, construct the relevant mission statement, define real family business, owner and manager needs leadership development, research concept of customer service. In terms of define measured success, we would think by increasing the repeat customers. We noticed that he mentioned about they had a sign. Dr. Michael said the sign drew a lot of customers, but we don't know how many repeat customers. There's no data to really, he said it was 50%, but we had no data to support that. We don't know if that was his opinion or if that was anecdotally speaking. But we would say they would need to increase their repeat customers, reduce employee turnover. Employees need to take ownership of all work roles and responsibilities. So it informs us or pretends this idea of cross-training. And that was something that Dr. Michaels noticed up front, was when she went into the River Creek Winery, how no one had it wasn't territorial, but the employees were working to make things work. And there was a point in the case at Resolute where someone needed assistance and one of the managers left and didn't provide assistance. So we see that this is a case of control, hierarchy, and the mission statement, or the quote unquote mission statement, or the philosophy is not matching up with what the culture of the organization is. At this time, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jamiko.
Awesome, thanks, David. So in looking at the exercise 3, where we're asked to create questions that we would ask the current staff, we thought about asking these open-ended questions as a way to get more information from them and create an environment where we can really get to the root cause of what's happening. So some of the questions that we came up with were, how would you describe your experience with the organization? So that way there isn't, like, we're not presupposing like what we think their experience might be, and it gives everyone in the organization a chance to talk about it from their perspective. What do you think are some strengths? What do you think are some areas of concern? What do you think is contributing to the current climate within the organization? Giving them a chance to talk about what they think the climate's like. How would you describe the climate? Do they feel like they're a part of a cohesive team? Why or why not? And what influences their opinions on that? What does the organization do to make you feel valued and not valued? And also, what would you do to describe how would you describe teamwork and collaboration between leadership and management and the employees? And our last question that we would ask to the current staff would be, do you feel like the current structure of the organization aids in success of the business? And then through these questions, we'll kind of be able to get to our resolving the central problem that we think is the issue from reading the case. Really looking at all of the things that have been identified in the case, there's a large ambiguous mission statement that essentially just says that they want to be a family, and there's a lack of leadership that contributes to a toxic work culture within the organization. The management doesn't really trust their employees. There's a hierarchy in the system where only certain people can do certain things, even down to parking spaces. There's parking for management, but there's no parking for the employees. So there's so many ways that this shows up that there's a lack of trust and a lack of leadership that contributes to everyone in the space not feeling like they are part of something important. Some secondary issues that we identified was, like we talked about, that lack of trust within the organization. evident in wine pouring examples in the consultant's visit. So one of the line staff talked about, well, I'm not allowed to do that. Like I need to bring someone else in because they think I'm going to do too much. And then another thing that was challenging was the owner's lack of objectivity. He was not very receptive to feedback that didn't align with his thinking. So he talked about creating this survey that used a 10-point scale that's kind of too broad in the first place. And then when he got results that was more qualitative, he said, well, she doesn't matter. Like her opinion doesn't matter because she wasn't here long enough. So kind of disregarding things that there could have been some truth in what that employee was saying, but instead of looking into it further, he just like washed it away. There is no shared vision within the organization, and that's very apparent when we think about like everyone when they were asked like what do you think the values are, and when we talked about family, there wasn't a similarity of like what family means to everyone, and there was no clear language or understanding what that is. So everyone was kind of just doing what they're doing in their specific pocket and not being like collectivists in like their actions. And then lastly, like many levels of hierarchy. So from like how the organization functions, who gets to park where, who actually gets, like one person's only the cashier, one person's only the server, one person is able to pour multiple cups of wine. And there's so many checks and balances that kind of contributes to the environment not being collegial, that organizations that claim to be family-like would actually embody. So I will turn it over to Blair.
So the alternative solutions that our group has decided on are to refine the organizational chart, hire an experienced manager, and provide Mr. Main with leadership development, or to expand employee training. And so the recommended solution that we have chosen was to hire an experienced manager and provide Mr. Main with leadership development. We chose the solution because we felt that it would best utilize the current time and human resources that they currently have to affect the most positive change. The implementation plan is to reorganize the organizational structure, cultivate the culture, and to reevaluate how they analyze their current data. First, they need to, by hiring an experienced manager and removing possibly Bob and Jillian, they will have more time to be able to cross-train all employees. Cross-training these employees will better ensure that everyone is able to successfully work with customers. Everyone will be formally trained on pouring the wine and conversing and interacting with customers on promotional items, wine accessories, and being able to sell the current items that they have on the floor. By doing this will hopefully increase productivity and as well as retention, which is a big problem for them. Also refining the organizational structure and employee development with the employee that left after a week. She did note in her survey that there was no explicit communication about how employees are able to move up and earn promotions. So with this organizational restructure, employee roles and responsibilities will be explicitly stated, trained, and it will be clear of how all employees are able to, what their expectations are in their roles and how they can move up within the organization. The next plan is to cultivate the culture. It is evident in this case study that though Mr. Main has a deep connection to this business, he is not necessarily business savvy. He inherited the business, but he doesn't have those foundational skills to actually run the business successfully. So with hiring a manager, he will now be able to be appointed to solely focus on cultivating the culture that he so desires at this family winery, with ensuring or helping to assist in the family atmosphere. In the case study, it said that they had monthly staff meetings, but they had been basically pushed to the side because there was never anything on the agenda. So with his position with cultivating the culture, it will be mandated that they reinstate those staff meetings, or they could possibly call them staff check-ins, for a friendlier environment where the staff can meet comfortably and express any concerns or questions that they may have. At one of the meetings, when Dr. Michaels was there, one of the employees almost timidly asked if they could test the wine, the new wine that they were serving to the customers, so that they would have a better insight onto how to describe it to the customers. Instead of them agreeing to it and going ahead and testing the wines out, he stated that Jillian would do that later on in the week and serve them the wine so that they could test it. So this staff check-in would be a safe environment where they could go through the wines, taste the wines, sample the wines, and also provide them with feedback that they are getting from the customers. The employees are the ones who are on the floor and who have the most interaction with customers. So they do have the most insight as to what customers are expressing about their experience here at the winery. Some of the surveys that they have gotten from the customers, as have been previously stated, some of them have been very comparable to, they've compared their experiences with River Creek Winery and saying that they have a friendly environment and they just had an overall better experience. So it is important that the employees do have their input seriously considered, because they do have the most interaction with customers and will be able to give that feedback to Mr. Main and to the manager. With the mission and vision, when the consultant asked him what the vision and mission of the winery was, he just, like David said, he just basically described a feeling or environment that his grandfather wanted for the business. There was no specific mission or vision, that they ensure that all of their tasks and responsibilities are carried out and aligned with that. So he needs to make sure that he actually sits down and creates a mission and vision that is aligned with the expectations of their employees. The employees need to be explicitly told how they should be interacting with customers, the type of environment that they're trying to cultivate to bring about, so that their mission and vision can be explicitly stated and known to everyone, because that is another issue, that, you know, everyone is not on the same page. They're all coming in with their own ideas. They did a survey with the consultant where they had to express the big picture ideas or things that were important, values that were important to them, and none of them had any similarities in their values. So none of them are coming to the winery with the same goals in mind. So of course, everyone is doing their own thing. No one is on the same page. So that needs to be brought to the attention of Mr. Main, and he needs to develop this culture that he so desperately says that he wants. They have to put in the work. With a small business like this, it is important that everyone understands that their contribution directly affects the success and the failure of the organization. And at this current time, it does not come across that specifically Bob and Jillian, who are the current managers, feel this way. They most of the time are tucked away in their offices. They make decisions on their own personal feelings of what they think is working, not based off of any of the data that they have or any of the input that the employees are giving them based on customer feedback. And then lastly, they need to reevaluate the data that they currently have and how they are analyzing it. They do have some data, but as stated previously, if it is any type of negative feedback, they disregard. Well, Mr. Main disregards it, specifically with the employee who quit after a week. They just disregarded it as negative feedback when they should have actually used that, because some of their current employees also feel similar. So they need to think about also with their advertisement. The consultant asked them about how do they get most of their customers, because that was one of his concerns, that they don't have a lot of return customers. They said that the street advertisement gets them about 50% of their customers. So they really need to take into account really where that is coming from. Is it from advertisement of street signs? Is it from the travel agents that he said, and how that correlates and relates to the customer visits that they have, and also with how that relates to the wine that they are being sold, that is being sold. We suggest that they provide those new customers that come in their surveys. These are the people that they're trying to recruit and trying to ensure that they come back. So these are the people that they need to be surveying. Some of the people that they are currently surveying is not necessarily the demographic that they are looking for. Like we said, with the employees, they have a high turnover rate, but they are steadily surveying the wrong type of people. You need to survey who you're trying to recruit. So they need to be surveying the customers that are coming in, those new customers coming in, asking them, why are they here? What was their experience? What would they like to see different? Again, with the survey that was comparing the other winery, it was evident that the atmosphere was one of the main reasons of why they preferred the other wineries, which goes back to that culture that they have in the winery. It's evident to all the employees that everyone is not on the same page without anything being stated. And with the data that they do have, it's important that they actually use and act on that data. You cannot ask for someone's feedback and then not use it. That's just a waste of time. So the data that they are collecting has to drive the decisions that they are making to move forward in their business. If he truly wants this to be a success and to continue on with this family business. So that is our presentation.
All right. You identified the central problem, which is Mr. Main is not a leader. He was, this is the old adage, he was born on third and thought he hit a triple. He inherited this. And that doesn't make him a leader. And obviously he displays no leadership characteristics. He's going to have to go through some leadership training if he's interested, but hiring the manager, but I'm not sure how interested he is in, so he never shows up in the day-to-day operations. Even though his position might be that of leader, he certainly does not act as if he were a leader. I'm not sure you can fix him. The best thing here probably is to take him out of the equation, just have him hire a manager and let the manager run the place and then do all the things that you said. I mean, you have done all the excellent job of outlining what you would have to do, but you also talked about, will he use the data, even if you get him the right data? I mean, he's using David pointed out, convenient sample. If you want to know why people leave, you ask them. You don't ask the people that stay. Again, that's when we talk about convenient sample in a negative light. That's the whole notion. They were convenient, so we just asked them about. If you want to know what they thought, then you need to ask them. 90% of the time in organizations, we do convenient sampling. That's our problem. That's one of our biggest problems. And then we don't act upon the data. If we don't like it, we pretend it's not there, or we do something else. I mean, this is a classic case of leadership matters. This was, and the irony is, it is a family business, and it is a dysfunctional family. It is patriarchal and hierarchical, and it is a dysfunctional family. It operates like a lot of families do, except that you can't make money operating like a family. With all of the things. I mean, some of the people were like the kids' table at Thanksgiving. They could do this, but couldn't do that. I mean, it really did function like a dysfunctional family does, with predetermined roles that you can't ever break out of. I mean, you're always the nephew. You're never going to be on the same level as the generation older than you. You're always going to be seen as less than. All families work that way. Family's not a good way to run a business. And just because your dad or your granddad was successful at something doesn't mean you will. Get back to the sports analogies. Ken Griffey Jr. is an anomaly. Of my generation, his dad was a great player for Cincinnati, and he's one of the few players in the history of major leagues of any kind of professional sports that were better than their father. Most of the kids aren't nearly as good. I mean, I think about, again, from my era in golf, Jack Nicklaus was the greatest golfer of all time. Now, Tiger was a better player, and if he'd stayed healthy and behaved himself, he would have surpassed all of Jack's records, but he couldn't do that. But that's part of it. But Jack Nicklaus, he had what, 4 sons, and you know, all of them tried to be professional golfers. Lord have mercy, they hit, you know, they hit more people than Gerald Ford playing golf. I mean, it was, you know, every time they hit somebody, I mean, his boys just sprayed it everywhere. They could not play. I don't mean they weren't good. I mean, they were bad. But they all thought because their father was a professional golfer that they would all be professional golfers. None of them were. You know. One made it to the, you know, to the tour, and he couldn't play, and none of the rest of them could even make it to the tour. Just because their dad was the greatest of all time doesn't mean that you are. So that's part of that family generational thing that you get into. And we know those kinds of things. But yeah, there was a lot of wasn't using the data they had their own data. I mean, you know, organizational chart. I mean, organizational chart is not compatible with a family business, because that puts you in a hierarchy that a dysfunctional family maybe. But this case should be the notion here of, in absence of leadership, you have chaos. Leadership is more than management. And without leadership, things go off the rail. And yeah, just like Gaston County, they won't change their process. They won't accept the data. Now, to David's point, and we're going to go to break before we have our last one. To David's point, let me show you the data that came out this week. Let me share my screen. I should have had it prepped already. I will speak to it today. We've already done all these. Let me close them. So I called my colleague earlier this week and thanked him for putting the data out. Let's see, let me get it. To David's point, all right, I told you that 40% of the freshmen last year left. Are you seeing my screen share? Are y'all seeing my screen share? Am I?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, I gotta get y'all back over here. All right. So I told you that, you know, again, we keep advancing this narrative that that it's dormitories and food service, and it's not. It's just not. The data has been telling us that for years. Well, this is this year's data from 2021. This is on the freshman class right here. First year, that was last year's group that we lost 40% of. Now, our comparison group here is all private colleges in the Southeast. Now, we're controlling for the variable of COVID, in that everybody had COVID. Can't use COVID as an excuse, because everybody had COVID. It wasn't like we owned the place that had it. And so here are the things that were lowest that the kids keep telling us. Quality of interaction with academic advisors, quality of interactions with faculty, that would be instruction. Applying facts, theories, and methods to practical problems or new situations, again, that would be instruction. Quality of interactions with staff and offices, and connected ideas from your courses to prior experiences and knowledge. This would be what we would call engagement, or instructional engagement right here. That's compared to everybody else. You can't blame COVID. I can't be any clearer. We've done our own surveying, the group of data people at Garden Web, we've done our own survey using Net Promoter Score. Food service and dormitories consistently score high. The net promoter on those is always positive, anywhere from 30 to 60 positive on a 100-point scale of -100 to +100. they're always somewhere between 30s and 60s, regardless of the group, always. And instruction and engagement is always in the negative 30 to 60, always. This survey, that surveyed all of them, you just saw the data. The data don't lie. It's our students aren't leaving because of food service and dormitories. Again, back to Hertzberg's two-factor theory. The things that make you stay are not the same things that make you go. What's wrong with this statement? I know it's food service and dormitories because I have students come up to me every once in a while complain about the food service. Those students are still here. They didn't leave. That's a convenience sample. If they stay and complain, at least they stayed. If retention is what we're talking about, if that's the metric, we have to ask the ones who left, why did they leave? And that's what this survey just did. And they told you it was lack of instructional engagement. If my financial aid is portable with me, so if I get $5,000 in financial aid, that same $5,000 at Gardner-Webb, I get the same $5,000 at UNC Charlotte. The difference is we start from a price point of $48,000 at Gardner-Webb at a price point of $24,000 at UNC Charlotte. And you know, we can discount at Gardner-Webb, and we do, beyond where we're losing money on every student. Bigger truck. That's the analogy. I told you the story. The analogy is bigger truck. The two fellows went down to Cordele, Georgia, and bought a truckload of cantaloupes, and they paid 50 cents for them. And they drove them to Asheville and sold them two for $1. When they got done, they realized they had lost money, and they said, "Well, I guess we just need a bigger truck." No, you lost money on each one. We lose money on every student. We've discounted our rate down so low. But the deal is we still can't compete because we start so high. We can't compete with a state college. That same kid can take his financial aid over there. Now, the difference is the reason they come is because of that academic engagement, that personal service, those small class sizes. That only works if we teach in that methodology. If we still get our podium, drag it out to the middle of the room and lecture to two kids in a room, and I have physically seen that at Gardner-Webb. And so I told you our last initiative to address, the whole group instruction of lecturing is we took the podiums out of the classroom and bought those little triangular desks that have a little circle cut out like my belly and put them together so the kids would be in groups. And we thought that would influence instruction. We thought if we changed the furniture in the room, that would change instruction. I cannot make this up. I've got a picture on my phone of this that I show people to prove that I'm not lying to them. They thought that changing the furniture in the room would change the instructional modality. And so now when you walk by the rooms, the students have taken those little desks, they fit in groups of 4, and they pulled them apart so they're not sitting there facing one another like chickens in a coop. And the instructors, they've hid their podiums. They've got them some little portable podium and brought them back in. They're standing over in the corner behind their little podium and still teaching the same way they taught before. But we expected if we changed the furniture in the room, I can't make this up, how stupid this is. If we changed the furniture in the room, that we would change the instructional modality. We did not. The data keeps telling us it's the construction, stupid, but nope. It's food service. It's food service and dormitories. We can't get past that. Doesn't matter how much data we show them, take pictures, go out the week of Thanksgiving and see how many classes are canceled. They're not even having classes. Nope, that's not it. And so as we go to our quick break here, we're only going to break for 10, and we'll finish up. How do you fix that? How do you fix it when the organization absolutely refused to acknowledge the obvious? What do? Because just like this case of wine, it doesn't matter what you tell Mr. Maine. He's not going to be willing to fix it. He's not going to want to hear that. He inherited this business. He thinks that birthright entitles him to success, not just the winery, but to success. And he's angry, and somebody has given him a raw deal. He has a sense of entitlement that no matter what the reality is, people are supposed to come and buy my wine. They always did before. They're supposed to do that. They're supposed to maintain my lifestyle. I am owed that. We have a sense of entitlement at Gardner-Webb that these students are supposed to come here. They owe us that money. Regardless of what we give them in terms of customer service, they're obligated to come. How dare they value shop us? We talk about value shopping at Gardner-Webb as if it were pornography. How dare they? How do you change that? How do you fix that when people refuse to acknowledge the obvious? When the gaslighting continues on a daily basis, that it's dormitories and food service. Dormitories and food service. What do you do? That's the question I'll leave you to ponder. We will be back at 12:10 and finish up. I'm not going to come back for 3 or 4 days. But that little dog, because she couldn't hear me come back, she said it that, and it's just break my heart. Just absolutely break my heart. That little dog. And let me find her picture here on my phone. And I tell people, it breaks my heart that at Gardner-Webb, we can't hear. We keep telling them they can't hear or won't hear that those students aren't coming back. And they keep standing at the door, doing all these things that don't matter, thinking those students are going to come back. And they're just not going to come back. And it breaks my heart that we just won't hear, can't hear, won't hear that you can stand there from now on at that door, but those students are not coming back. You're going to have to change what you do, because they're not coming back to what you have to offer at this time since the world changed in 2008. There's my tiny little dog. You can see how little she is. That's my wife, who is a small person, holding her. That was my little dog that inherited me. And just break my heart. But Gardner-Webb is just exactly the same way. It just breaks my heart that they stand at the door every day, wanting, begging, pleading for those students to come back. And it's been 13 years. You'd think after 13 years, you've used we've spent all of our reserves. We've taken out all of our endowment that we're allowed to. We're having to take federal money and loan money now. I mean, we had to go to, we couldn't pay for the Tucker Center. We had to go and let a bond company and let a junk bond, unrated junk bond, because our bank note was due and we couldn't pay it. We had a big balloon payment. So we now had to sign over our health sciences building where we have nursing and PA program. We had to give it to the bond company as collateral. We had to cut off the deed to the college. It's over on one side of the property. We had to take and separate the deed out and give that to them in order to get the loan. I mean, to get the bond let, so that because the bank called our note due and we couldn't pay it. This has all happened over the course of 13 years. But it's food service and dormitories. But now when they ask me again on Monday, well, lower the tuition, that's discount rate. That's what I'm talking about. They've got it at 70% now. I mean, we can't, the only thing we can do from there is just start paying them to come. But now, when I get asked again Monday or Tuesday in the meeting, I'm again gonna say it's all about instruction, folks. It's not about ball games. It's not about food service, not about dormitories, not about ball games. If you want them to come back, you're gonna have to provide perceived value. You're gonna have to teach them, and you may have to drop some of the majors that you've got and add some new ones. You may have to revision what undergraduate liberal arts education is. You may have to evaluate that, but you have to tell people the truth. Even though they don't want to hear it, I'm gonna tell you, they don't want to hear it. But you ethical leadership requires that you tell people the truth. That's part of it. All right, David, you get the last question or the last comment before we go to we got one presentation left all today? Man, we're doing good.
Do you know Western Carolina University? And what I was thinking about, Doc, was it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to do, I think, what you're saying, tell them the truth. But until they get that, then you can't have the supplemental measures like, you could offer very low, build the base up and then gradually raise it back up. But you can't get there if they can't really accept the data. But I was wondering do you know about Western Carolina? Some said, that they don't have tuition, or I guess they
did.
That's a trick, or is it, or?
What Western Carolina? Well, 3 colleges across the state did it. They're state colleges. 3 state colleges across the state. This happened five years ago. So what they did was, it's a gimmick. State colleges don't really have financial problems, but theoretically they had a financial problem with enrollment. They were concerned, and so Western Carolina, Pembroke down in the Sand Hills, UNC Pembroke, and Elizabeth City State out in the northeastern part. What they did is the state said they did a special statute is $500 tuition if you live within 100 air miles of their campus. Within 100 miles in those regions, we would give you $500 tuition. Now, tuition it's not that high at state colleges anyway. It's room and board fees where they get you at state colleges anyway. So while it looked like a real initiative for the people in those communities, back to their charter for state colleges is to serve the people in their region. While it looked good on paper, $500 tuition at places like that was not a significant savings for these people. And that came off of their financial aid anyway. And so in reality, for those 3 institutions, I'm just going to throw out some round numbers here. When this started 5 years ago, and you can Google it, the average cost at those 3rd tier institutions, and I don't mean that to be ugly. There's 3 tiers of state colleges. State and Carolina are in the top tier. They cost the most. And then there's a middle tier and the bottom tier, and then they charge accordingly. The all in at those institutions at the time was about $18,000 a year. And that's before financial aid and endowment and all that kicks in. And so that $500 tuition for people in those regions ended up reducing their bill accordingly only about $500. By the time you subtract everything, it was basically about a $500 discount. Now, $500 is not really enough to make you go or stay in an $18,000 proposition. That wasn't really enough money to affect enrollment that much. And it was just fees are higher, room and board. You know, again, it was more a political move to make it look like that we cared about people in those regions. But the truth of the matter is it did not significantly improve enrollment in any of those three institutions. It was just a gimmick. Again, those are very specific places that have much the problem that Gardner Webb has. I showed you those figures a minute ago. Yeah, I've got that. So let's use Western Carolina as the example. Let me share my screen quickly. Come on, you can do it. There we go. This is what we're talking about right here. This one and this one are representative of the counties west of Asheville, going south out that way. Remember, got to be within 100 miles. So was this program going to bring any diversity to Western Carolina? Of course not. There aren't any black kids that live within 100 miles of Colorado. We already know that. You know, in those counties out there, the only black kids are the ones that play ball at Western Carolina now. You know, so and then the exact same, but in reverse is it at Elizabeth City State. How many white kids live out there? They were going to diversify out there and bring in some white kids. How many white kids live within 100 miles of Elizabeth City State? None. Same as black kids on the other end of the state. Wasn't going to happen. So, you know, this was we're going to bring in local kids. We're going to work on diversity up and down. No, it didn't. And there's none to be had in either end of the state. And then the deal at Pembroke is we just need enrollment here. We don't have any. And the thing about it is what is the high during, you know, in the corridor of shame, which starts in North Carolina in that PD region and goes down to south of the border and goes down into South Carolina. How many of those kids go to college already? Again, nobody to give the money to. So what they did, they picked 3 schools, but they knew that even if it's not much, but even if it is, there's no kids to give the money to. Look at us. It's costing nothing. I mean, literally nothing. This initiative, the discount is minuscule, but there's no kids to give it to, the ones that they want to get, because they don't live there. And so again, the appearance of doing something without actually doing something. We don't want to address the issue that there's no diversity in Eastern or Western North Carolina. We don't want to address the issue that few kids graduate from high school in the corridor of shame. We don't want to address the real issue. We do something that's symbolic, like $500 tuition. And then, but when you go and look at the numbers, well, this didn't change anything. We just wanted the appearance of having done something. We didn't really want to actually do anything. And here's the bad part too. And this is relevant to Gardner Webb. What would happen if you got 500 new kids at Gardner Webb that were minority kids? Would we know what to do with them? Lord, no. Lord, no. Why are these kids in my room? you know, that pejorative, these kids. They wouldn't know what to do with them. Would they stay? Of course not. Of course they wouldn't stay. If we got them, if we conscripted them in some way, they wouldn't stay because we're not designed, nor do we have the desire to deal with those kids. You mean deal with those kids? Well, they're not the same as the ones you've already got. You might have to do something different. We don't want to do anything different. Now, back to the pictures quickly to amplify my point. I had this one already planned and prepared. See this nice looking lady right here? She was one of your classmates who came before you in DEOL. What do you notice about what's on her head? Her and her husband both matriculated in our DEOL program. They're Muslims, Jordan. His consultancy project was to bring in 500 international students who would pay the full tear from either China, from both China and from the Middle East. They were Chinese and Arabic, and he was hooked into a company that would do this. Now, these are people that would pay the full $48,000. Had it all worked out, everything was good, you know, transportation to and from, the whole thing. And when it got to the end, what did the college tell him? Told him, no, but we're not interested in that. It wouldn't be a good cultural fit. 500. That this was our DEOL's push to help them with their problem with undergraduate recruitment. The money's in hand. We've got them. All you got to do is say yes. We'll push the button. Hazim did this project. Hazim Almani, that was his wife, Razan. She did a little separate project in Student Success. That's right, money's green, but not to them. Turned down 500 full-paying students. They said bringing 500 Chinese or Arabic students would change the culture of the college, and they didn't want to do that. We'd rather lose with our crowd than win with somebody else's. You better learn that. You better know that. You know, of all the stupid things I say, that's the one you better learn more. We'd rather lose with our bunch than win with somebody else. 500 solves your problems, gets you out of the hole. Not willing. Not willing. So we went to 3 colleges where we knew we weren't going to get any students. We weren't going to get any diversity. We weren't going to do that. And we did this thing where we did this show of look at us. We're doing these wonderful things for diversity. This was the Republicans, by the way, in the General Assembly. Look at us. You claim we're bigots. Look at us. We're doing this thing for diversity. Except there was no diversity to get. And they knew that when they did it. They'd rather be nationalist, or you can go ahead and say racist than be financially solvent. That's correct. Let's just tell the truth. You know, I'm all about big T and little T truth. All right, last case study. Gosh, it's about to rain here. And I got to go to Gaston County and get my picture took. I'm telling you, I won't be able to do a thing in the world with my hair if it rains.
All right, we're going to be quick. Thank you, Tim. We also did a case of wine. Our group was Alexandra, Candace, Tim, and myself. Alexandra is unfortunately not able to be with us today, so we're going to do our best to represent her well. So to kick us off, we're just going to touch a little bit on the learning objectives. David has already covered these very well, but I will remind you that the learning objectives are to recognize and analyze simple but subtle clues of an organization's culture, to engage a client and develop a data gathering strategy, and to analyze data and make recommendations to a client. So up next, just a quick introduction to the case. Like I said, David has covered this very well, so we won't spend too much time on this, but Resolute Winery is a family-owned business that has a staff of 9 and is run by Mr. Main, who is the leader of the organization. Mr. Main has asked Dr. Marlena Michaels to come in and consult for the winery. The issues that he mentions are that business isn't really doing well anymore. There's not as many returning customers, and there's a high personnel turnover among his team. And in particular, the personnel that he's referring to is the lower level on the org charts. Typically, he tends to have better luck with managers and higher level positions. And then their competition that will be referenced in the case is River Creek Winery, which is right down the road from Resolute Winery. So we're going to touch a little bit next on the org chart. So as you can see, Mr. Main is at the very top. Susie is his assistant, and then you have two managers who are Jillian and Bob. The ones that we really focused on in this case were those who report up through Jillian. So you have Diane and Anne. The roles and responsibilities of the team are assigned based on this org chart. So what the previous group referred to is being the odd notion of the consultant came in and asked for a glass of wine while she was speaking with Mary, but Mary had to get Diane to actually pour the wine. And then Diane had to ask Jillian to go get a bottle of wine. It was just a very unusual sort of distribution of job duties there. The consultant made a comment that it was unusual for a small company to have an org chart like this. And Mr. Main's response was, I do believe it adds some professionalism, which is a little bit wacky to think that your boss just has an org chart to add professionalism to his company. So up next, we'll talk a little bit about the organizational culture, which was the first question in the discussion questions. River Creek Winery was a very, very short paragraph in this overall case study, but we got a pretty good picture of the culture of the winery just based on that, the short interaction that the consultant had. So she went in, it was free wine tastings. It was truly free. She got to sample as many as she wanted. She ended up purchasing 4 I think bottles from the winery. Her customer experience there, it was streamlined, it was welcoming. It seemed like the people there were having a great time. There was customer-centered strategy. So she worked with one person who carried her from wine tasting, helping to pick out the wines, going to retrieve the bottles, and then checking out. The culture was open and transparent. There was a sense of shared responsibility and moving towards a common goal for, of understanding of products. And then there was also trust among employees. On the flip side of that was Resolute Winery. So you go in and you have a free wine tasting, but it's actually $6 for a glass and you can only try 4, and they limit the amount of wine that you can actually sample in the glass. The customer experience, there's signs of disgruntlement, there's rolling of the eyes, there's, talking, texting on the BlackBerry the entire time that customers are in the store. And then there's just sort of a general avoidance of speaking one-on-one with customers if you weren't Mary or Paul, one of the people on the front line. The culture was one of mistrust and just really unnecessary hierarchy. Again, different people having to go get the wine. At one point, Jillian was out of the office. And so instead of Diane going to get the bottle of wine, she just put, we're currently out of stock on this bottle, which is nuts. There's a sense of micromanagement among the team. At one point, Jillian watched Anne stock shelves, which was unusual. And Anne's, feedback to her team, which is the napkins really sell well, just sort of went nowhere. There's a high level of understanding of the products among the team. There's actually not a high level of understanding of the products. That is a mistype. They actually haven't sampled the wine that they're trying to sell. And then there's just this sense of transactional leadership. So it's an odd workflow that isn't even challenged, even when it doesn't make sense. So next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the mission statement with which the other team referenced. It's essentially just an inspirational poster. It's not really a mission statement. They say, in good wine, there is hard work. In wine, there is truth, but family makes wine come to life. Well, there is no truth amongst this team, as they talked about with the feedback to Mr. Main. There is no hard work amongst the team. You actually have somebody whose job it is to go open bottles of wine and then watch other employees stock shelves. And then there is no sense of family among this team. So next up is Candace.
Yes, so going into question number 2 for Dr. Michael's strategy, the team thought about this quote, let the quantitative data drive the qualitative questions. And this kind of helps us kind of gauge the climate better. So having things like focus groups, surveys, secret shoppers, and including everything from the interviews to create a plan for implementation. So the first question that we were thinking about is like, what is Mr. Main's strategy? And this will also include like those first impressions that Kim added in the previous slide versus the experience that she had dealing with the competitors. And also too, you can ask the staff, like, what do you feel like his strategy of the organization is, or is his mission and the vision lining up to what you all do every day? The second question was, what are the shared perceptions of the team? How confident are the employees at what they do every day? Going back to the conversation about avoidance, it should never be a time, when you come into an organization where somebody cannot provide customer service to a customer that comes in, whether it's their first time, second time, or whatever. The family orientation does not show up at the door. And then also, addressing those hygiene factors for the staff. The hygiene factor for one was like the work conditions, how people feel like they have to stay in their place and not overstep certain boundaries, even to pour wine, when you're busy, help each other out while we're, working in this space. Or even the interaction when Dr. Michaels came in and she asked for Mr. Main, and then the energy was, well, why do you want to talk to him? Like very defensive, as if, like he's like the whiz, like, you can't talk to him, like he's you can't have access to him. But if it's a family oriented space, you should be able to have access to him or know who he is, or be able to kindly ask for him without that perception being put out there. And then also making sure that we're including things like how the employees feel about not having a parking space. When you're trying to come to work and be at work on time, and you can't find a parking space, it's like, do you really want me to be at work on time, or do you want me to fight with everybody else to find a parking space? And it put a divide between the upper management and the lower management as well. And, are there any opportunities for growth or things that will motivate the staff to do anything extra? The last question was, what are the beliefs and values assumptions that provide the identity and set standards for the behavior in this organization? Does the hierarchy system that he currently have really mean family? So even though, we may have different levels of leadership, do we function together as a team, as a family? Are we really customer driven? Because we can use the example of like Chick-fil-A. I've been, my order has been taken by upper management people in the drive-through. Like, no job is too big or small for anybody in that group. So there's a support system there. And then to do they really understand the product and how to deliver that product? And so this could be an opportunity for them to bring someone out, like a wine expert, to kind of like tell them like what it really means to deliver a wine product. How can we push this product? Do they even know how to match wines with different foods, kind of like push the product to make people want to buy more? Wine experts also explain things like flavor palettes, like how to match things with different foods and events, so you're not necessarily wasting wine. Because sometimes, like, for example, I've been to Total Wine and I'm like, okay, I like this particular kind of flavor, but that may not be the actual kind of wine that I want. So having somebody to kind of like break down
types of wines, reds and white, the flavor, the aftertaste, so we're not necessarily wasting product, wasting people's time, and also pushing everything that we have available to get more sales for our customers. Next slide, please. Also, to continue that, we wanted to include the emphasis on how we are surveying, even though he had a kind of archaic way of doing the surveys, which was having like a suggestion box and things of that nature. We definitely want to make sure that when we are getting the engagement and satisfaction, that we're also making sure that we're differentiating whether if it's an employee or a customer's feedback, and just making sure that there is a model for job performance. I don't think that each individual's roles within that organization understood what they really were supposed to do. And like I said, reiterating again, having that wine expert there to, utilize those key points and job enrichment opportunities. He avoided the feedback from the suggestion box and brought up things about how like the younger employees always left, and it was really no point of really like training them to do stuff because they were going to leave anyway. But as we see now with the current climate, the younger generation, if they don't feel a sense of belonging to what they do or a sense of connection, they are going to leave. So what kind of job enrichment opportunities would people like to see? And as everyone provides their feedback, we're just going to use that as continual improvement efforts for Resolute Winery.
All right, I'm gonna go fast since we're already at one. Mr. Main's approach to gathering data was completely wrong. He was gathering the wrong type of data. He was seeking that answers from the wrong customers, and he also was being biased when he got a response. So when he got the customer serve, when he did the employee survey and he got the response back that was negative, he didn't believe it. He was like, they're not talking about my winery. We're a family. So that was a problem. And also with seeking answers from the wrong customers. His customer survey, there was only a few results that were all high on the scale. But later, when we move on to the next slide, we'll find out that the survey that Dr. Michaels did, where she went in and got 2 college students to ask deeper questions to the survey, it presented the opposite of what the customer survey was, the customer survey that Mr. Mann created. So moving on to that, to the data gathering strategies. So Dr. Michaels used observations, the company meeting, the interview / employee survey, the values exercise, and then the customer survey. So I'm gonna, because the group before us did a great job, I'm only gonna highlight a few of those. So the observation was comparing the 2 wineries that Dr. Michaels went to, the one that she went to in the beginning that had a great score versus the winery that Mr. Main owned. And it was glaring differences that were also highlighted as we move on. Like when we go to the actual interviews of the employees and the surveys from the employees, we saw that there was organizational issues. There was structure issues. It was a leadership issue. Mr. Main was definitely biased, and he wanted to go back to what he called the good days, which was when it was family run. And I couldn't help but think about what Dr. Lamb talks about with Gardner Webb, seeking getting the wrong results, and then not wanting to believe when they believe what the real issue is. And as I move to now, I'm gonna move to the customer survey. I'm sorry, my computer's freezing. when I moved to the customer survey, so Dr. Michaels had 2 college students go back and ask open-ended questions to customers that would visit multiple wineries. So these customers had the insight to see the differences and be able to pick and choose our best, like we all have our favorite restaurants or our favorite places that we go. And that data showed that the winery is not doing well. The customer survey that Mr. Main created is not the true story. So when you don't have the true story, you can't really come up with the recommendation. So his inability to take the real results, seek the real results, and make changes based off the real results was really causing the downfall of the winery. So now I'm going to move to recommendations.
So the recommendations that we had were to implement new technologies to reach the customers like Salesforce. We couldn't, we really was trying to gauge the environment, because like I said, they brought up the BlackBerry and I'm just like, this is supposed to be like an older case, but making sure that we do have like a customer service management system to kind of like go back and analyze that data. The suggestion was like within 3 months, and then use that input to provide more data for the company in relation to customer service, so we can continue improvements. Also use target multimedia advertisements for the customers, utilizing social media, TV, local prints, and sending those things out to those customers who come on a continual basis, or even the one-time shoppers. Also, just making sure that we are have an unbiased source of shared objectives when it comes to team results, and also have another consultant come back and conduct another assessment just to see how the team is progressing later on. And then also including another customer service strategy for creating a wine membership that will kind of bring more people to come out, spend more money, provide incentives for spending money for the number of times and visits, and then have a group team building outing, to see, other wineries that Resolute Winery may have. We don't know if this is like the only winery that they have, but if they do have more than one, just kind of see like how they do it at other locations. And this will kind of increase their exposure for improvements, more positive habits and how they interact with the customers and also with each other. And that is it.
Right.
Okay, great. I see our time is fast, but I want to make a couple of points. First, thanks to Miko, North Carolina Promise. He put the link up to that with the 3 colleges that we talked about. And it says clearly all other fees and charges apply. So, truth in lending there. To kind of wrap up today, as we make the transition from quantitative to qualitative today, the group that just Kim, Tim, and Candace, one of the things that they brought out and they highlighted in theirs, and I wanted to make sure that I kind of concluded with this today already, so thank you for bringing this up. The consultant went and visited other wineries. I can't tell you how important that is in qualitative work. I've talked to you about a dissertation that I did several years ago with one of my doctorals, where she was doing a program evaluation and we were doing the qualitative work. One of the things I had her do was go visit other programs that looked like it across the state that portended to do the same thing. We were looking at alternative school programs, and she had been asked in her dissertation, and the district was paying to do an evaluation, as you have to do with all grant programs. Had to do a program evaluation of the alternative school program in Charlotte, which is not an insignificant, several schools, a lot of money, hundreds of faculty. And so I said, I said, Lisa, you need to start out with going and visiting go and visit other programs so you know what you're looking for. I can't tell you how important that is as a consultant, to do your qualitative work, observation, go to other places. Get some context. That's a best practice in our business of consultancy. you know, when people ask me to come and tell them things, you know, I try to, you know, to follow a professional methodological format, but I also try to make sure that I've seen enough things that are enough organizations or schools that look like those that I can put theirs in context. That self-awareness, that education yourself, educating yourself is the best tool that you have as a consultant. That's the best tool that you have. And because it puts you in, you know, that qualitative piece puts you, it gives you the proper framework that everything else can then work off of. Thank you again for participating today. What does our weekly schedule say? Let's cover that right quick. Don't forget to do your discussion boards. And so here's our weekly schedule. All right, so we met today and we meet again in 2 weeks. The COVID numbers have unfortunately not gotten any better. I still hold out hope that we could get together one time this semester. One of the 14 of my new Gaston students I started with this week's already got COVID. Unfortunately, we've got several of our doctoral students. We lost Jackie Bridges, who runs the Gardner Webb video magazine, The Web. Her husband passed away Monday unexpectedly from COVID. You know, Cleveland County has the highest number in the state, by the way. And Charlotte, we're still under all the mask and distancing mandates if we were to try to get together. And so I can't at this point say that I feel good about. We've had to, Dr. Laws and I, Steve, we've had to move our classes in Charlotte online because of the restrictions. Our rooms just aren't big enough to get the distancing that we need to have. There's only one room there that meets that 220, that big double kind of conference room, and only one group can use it at a time. None of the other rooms would allow for distancing, and you got to wear a mask anyway. But if there's not room for distancing, we can't use those rooms. So you have to listen to me drone on and rant like the crazy old man that I am on Saturday. But at least, you know, I feel good that we're getting something done. I believe that there's value in what we're doing. I hope you find they're finding value. If you don't, you need to tell them. But we're doing what we can do during the times that we have. So I want you all to be safe, take precautions, get your vaccines. I got my booster, I think, since the last time I saw y'all. You know, you had to wait 6 months. And so I got my booster. I think the Monday after we had class last time, I got my booster. So if you haven't had your vaccine, please get it. Think about your family. If you hadn't got your booster, if it's time, get it. If you got Pfizer, get your booster. Try to stay safe, wear your mask, be safe and be careful. And you know, remember, it's up to you to look out for yourself and your family. And that's important. I appreciate you being with us today. As always, thank you for choosing Gardner Webb. The graduate programs are still strong. And our degree still means something. So you've made the right choice. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Everybody be safe.